Chapter 381. Weeze held a huge grudge against the Robert family, because the spaceplane had exploded before it could even get much out of it. If it was in the past, the energy ores on the aircraft could still be pried out. After all, they were worth some money. But now that there were so many top-grade energy ores on the ground, the ones on the aircraft couldn't catch the cat's attention. Weeze let out a loud curse as it stared at the destroyed spaceplane in the sky. Then, it returned to the surface and continued its great mining business. It didn't even bother to look anyone in the eye, and they were smart enough not to provoke the cat. Only a few robots were left struggling. The frequency of falling objects had decreased a lot. Due to the different composition of the atmosphere, the debris didn't burn for long and the sky returned to its original state. Sillin looked at the debris on the ground, and then at the robots that were still struggling. They weren't affected by the destruction of the aircraft. They were relatively independent, but they could always follow their master's orders. Aside from the fact that they didn't have their own thoughts, this kind of mechanical army was pretty good. It was just that they were unlucky to run into the Shi family and the Shi family's army. Shi Kai was the only one behind the Shi family army, but the genius Shi Mu was also on their side. If the Robert family couldn't win now, then it would only get worse in the future. A Yu's secret would boost the Shi family's morale. Although Yu didn't say anything, Sillin had the same feeling. Some people from the Freedom Army had already started cleaning up the battlefield. Others continued mining. Now that the enemies were dealt with, they could go mining without worry. A person from the Freedom Army was holding a tool and was about to start digging at a relatively large pile of ore. But as soon as he got close, a pair of cat paws appeared on the pile of ore, followed by a seemingly harmless cat head. Huimao pressed its paws against the pile of ore and looked at the person carrying the tool. It bared its teeth at the person who was holding the tool. The person was stunned for a moment, then quickly turned around and ran away as if it was the plague. Seeing that the person was so tactful, Huimao didn't continue to press and continued to mine. The people from the Freedom Army looked at each other and curled their lips. Forget it, don't provoke that cat. Didn't you see how those metal men were turned into ashes? The Freedom Army attributed Huimao's behavior to an animal's sense of territory. In truth, everyone in the 11th squad knew that territory was bullshit. What awareness! To that bastard, these mines were nothing but piles of fish biscuits. Achenthus discussed with Sillin for a while and divided the area. Sillin occupied the majority of the area. After dividing the area, mining would be faster, and there would be no conflicts. The Freedom Army had no complaints right now, and the metal soldiers were still floating in the sky. If a fight broke out, then they would definitely be the ones to suffer. It was better to be obedient, and at least they could reap some benefits. The fact that Alkenthus had brought them here meant that their brains were a bit better than most of the lunatics at Sector V. Not only were they a bit better skilled, they were also smarter than most of the madmen at Sector V. The danger was over, and there were still metal soldiers standing guard in the air. Old Mo also wandered out to survey the terrain and the surrounding environment. Others were concerned about the mineral deposits, but Mo Hung was more concerned about how such a mineral deposit could form here. Although Mo Hung was not proficient in these things, he had studied similar projects for a period of time in the past. After investigating this place, Mo Hung had a guess. He felt that someone had used the environment and magnetic field here, and used some technology to catalyze the formation of this mineral deposit. Mo Hung didn't know how, but he did know that there were traces of artificial modification. It was just that it was a long time ago, and it wasn't that obvious. When Mo Hung mentioned his doubt to Sillin, Sillin smiled and told him not to look into it. Old Mo sighed. As I thought, there are top geniuses in every era. It's just that some have been discovered and become famous overnight, and some have remained unknown until now. Sillin didn't explain the Shi family's matter to Mo Hung, and the old man pretended to be confused. Mo Hung had speculated a lot of things during his time with the 11th squad, but he didn't show it on his face. He pretended that he didn't know anything, and since Sillin told him not to look into it, Mo Hung pretended that he didn't notice anything. There were a lot of wounded, but the people of the 11th squad were fine. Chifeng's claw wound was a little more serious, but the others only suffered minor injuries. The 11th squad had also provided aid to the Free Army. If it weren't for them, The Free Army would have suffered more casualties. Aiken thus was very grateful for this. A lot of places on the planet, especially places with a lot of mineral deposits, had projectors installed underground. That was why White Knight could be seen in the form of a projection. For example, right now White Knight, Moon and Sigma were taking a walk side by side, but no one knew what they were talking about. It was a soundless conversation that most people couldn't hear. After a period of communication, Moon and White Knight walked into the spaceplane. We stopped watching them after seeing that the mines had been cordoned off and played with them. "You're White Knight." Huimao stood on a high shelf and looked down at the white projection below. It was growing more and more fond of the feeling of looking down at others from a high place. White Knight didn't answer. She simply looked at Huimao. After the chaotic battle earlier, she already knew what was different about the cat. Wheeze wagged its tail. "I know a guy called White Knight from the Miss Bodhisattva sect, but he's a man. His eyes are one black and one white, and he looks like an idiot. Ah, there's something in common between the two of you, and that is you both have facial paralysis. White Knight and Moon. Can't this cat speak a little more gracefully?" Although White Knight didn't have much of an expression on her face, you knew that she still cared a lot about Wheeze's words. Moreover, her name was originally just one word, and that was White. It was only because of the minerals and the Olillo incident in the myth of creation that she was labeled as White. Actually, it's not that big of a deal. The League of Stars and Miss Bodhisattva are huge. There are plenty of people with the same name, Sigma hurriedly explained. White Spirit. What? Huimao cocked an ear to the side and looked at the white figure below. "I'll be called White Spirit from now on. White Knight is the name of the energy mine," White Spirit said. Ayu swung his arms and circled the White Spirit. "In any case, I'll just call you Whitey." Ayu told Wheeze about the White Spirit. Now that the White Spirit was completely free, she no longer needed to guard the energy mine. The Shi family was supposed to stay together, wasn't it? That was why the White Spirit was supposed to stay with Sigma and Moon. Huimao slowly wagged his tail and stared at White Spirit for a while. "You don't look like a bad person. Fine, I'll let you join the team." When Carrie heard Huimao's words, he curled his lips and knocked Huimao on the head with a tool. Then he quickly put down the tool and slipped away. Huimao bared his teeth at Carrie's back, stretched out his claws and pulled them back. "I'll deal with him later. I'll pry open all of Carrie's storage cabinets." No one knew what the White Spirit was thinking when she saw the scene. Even though to others she was just a virtual character created by a program, just like the original robot, the White Spirit had her own thoughts. And that was what amazed Shikai. Huimao bent his forelimbs and combed the hair on his head that was messed up by Carrie. Then he looked at White Spirit and asked, "Oh right, when did you become Cheto's girlfriend?" White Spirit. "Who the hell is Cheto?" The White Spirit looked at Moon, who was counting his fingers, and then at Sigma, who was looking left and right. "I want to know as well." Chapter 382. The edge of the mining area was littered with debris. The cleaning robots only cleaned up the debris within the mining area briefly. They didn't bother to clean up the mechanical debris or the smashed robots outside of the mining area. The Freedom Army only took care of their own casualties. They didn't bother to deal with the metal guys because they were all too busy right now. Right now, Cheto was standing quietly in the middle of the wreckage. He looked very bleak in this dim environment, or at least that was what Carrie thought. Carrie had just knocked Huimao with a tool and slipped out of the mining area. When he was circling around the perimeter, he saw Cheto standing among the wreckage, so he turned a corner and walked towards him. In Carrie's opinion, Cheto must have been touched by the scene. After all, Cheto was a robot. How could he not be emotional when he saw the wreckage in front of him? It was no different from a human seeing a field of corpses strewn all over the place. "Hey brother. Feeling sad alone?" Carrie walked up to Cheto from behind and patted his shoulder. Cheto slowly turned around to look at Carrie. There wasn't any sadness on his face, and it definitely didn't look like he was sad. However, Carrie attributed it to a robot's habitual facial stiffness. Actually, there's no need to think too much about it. Hunters like us face things like this all the time. I was a little uncomfortable when I first saw a field of corpses and a sea of blood, but I'm a human too. Later on I got used to it. Some bastards deserve to die. Just think about how evil those robots were. While Carrie was talking, he saw Hui Mao and Sigma walking towards him from the corner of his eye. The white spirit's white figure was too eye-catching in this environment, so it was hard not to notice it. Ahem, about that. Keep thinking about it. I still need to help out over there. Carrie said goodbye and slipped away. He didn't want that fat cat to take revenge on him. Hui Mao trotted over and jumped onto Cheto's shoulder. Then it patted Cheto with its paw and said to the white spirit, "Here, this is Cheto." Cheto looked at Moon and the others before looking at the white spirit studying him. Finally, he turned to look at Hui Mao and asked, "What's wrong?" "It's nothing. Little Bai said that she doesn't know you, so I brought her here to meet you. She's your girlfriend after all." Wheeze licked its paws innocently and pretended not to notice Ayu gesturing at it. Cheto and the white spirit turned to look at Moon at the same time. Moon's head was still bowed, and his thumbs made of oval-shaped metal plates were circling each other. Suddenly he let out an ah and said to Cheto, "What did Carrie say to you just now? Is there a secret?" What a great way to change the topic. Still, Cheto gave him face and answered, "It's nothing. Carrie thought I was being sentimental here, and he was just expressing his concern for his teammates." What's there to be sentimental about? Hui Mao tilted his head and looked at Cheto. Cheto shot him a helpless look and said, "I don't know. Maybe human hearts are a little fragile and emotional or something." Ayu scratched his round head and said, "Then why are you standing here? This place is full of trash." "I'm looking for some useful information," Cheto answered. "Information?" "Yeah." While saying this, Cheto pointed at a robot that had been chopped in half, its torso caved in, and its head was severely deformed. Then, a disjointed image appeared in his eyes. The image was very blurry, but it was clear that there were two human figures in it. One of them was Robert Borat, and the other was flickering a lot because the image was very blurry. This is their memories. Cheto's eyes returned to normal, and the image disappeared. Doesn't that mean we can read the memories of these dead robots to find useful information? Hui Mao asked. Not every robot. We can't read the memories of robots that are completely dead and relatively conscious. However, we can read the memories of robots that are in between these two states. However, the memories of these robots are incomplete, and the degree of damage varies. It's up to luck to get useful information. Hui Mao, Yu Sigma, and even the White Spirit tried to read the memories of those who were in the dead and awake states. Most of them were in the dead state, and it wasn't easy for them to find a robot in the middle state. Unfortunately, it wasn't as smooth as Cheto's. Meow. I'm giving up. Hui Mao clawed at a nearby robot that was in the dead state. He couldn't read Cheto's memories, and all he could see was a series of images that couldn't be seen at all. Although he was angry, he didn't stomp on the robot in the middle state that he had finally found. Instead, he vented his anger on the dead robot. Cheto walked over and read the memories of the robot Hui Mao had tossed aside. He didn't find anything special for now, so he decided to go back and organize the information he had gathered. He should be able to find something. If we can find more information, we'll be able to learn more of the Robert family's secrets. It'll make our operation a little easier, and it'll be good for us, said Hui Mao while scratching at a dead robot with his claws. A cat was a vengeful animal. It still remembered that it had failed to obtain any benefits from Robert Borat, and that the fellow had slipped away. No, these memories can only be used as a reference. They might not be correct, said Cheto. Machines don't lie. Ayu didn't agree with Cheto's explanation. His master once told him that robots were very honest, and that their memories were as they were. Unlike humans, they wouldn't make up a lot of things that they didn't know how to make up. I agree, said Hui Mao. Cheto let out a sigh and nudged the robot next to him with his foot. Then he sat down in front of Hui Mao and held out a hand. The image of a fish appeared on his palm. It was a fish Hui Mao had raised in a pond in Sigma's indoor garden. What is this? Asked Cheto. Fish, of course, replied Hui Mao. The image on Cheto's palm flashed, and a plate of dried fish appeared in front of him. It was the kind Hui Mao often ate. What about this? Dried fish. What about this? The image changed into a bag of fish biscuits. It was Hui Mao's favorite flavor. Fish biscuits. Huimao's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Then the fish biscuits flashed again and turned into an all-fish meal. It was a food Huimao had always wanted, but never had the chance to eat. Cheto asked, "What do you hate the most?" Huimao's mouth started watering the moment he saw the all-fish meal in Cheto's hand. His pupils dilated, and his voice grew louder and louder. Whole fish set. Huimao's curved tail froze before he could finish his answer. His ears pulled back a little, and his beard shook a little. Then he fell silent and lowered his head in deep thought. What do you hate the most? What do you hate the most? Moon, Sigma, and the White Spirit didn't say anything. If they were in Huimao's shoes, they might not have handled the situation better. Cheto closed his palm, and the image disappeared. They are real, but they might not be correct. If I had asked you this last question alone, or if I hadn't shown you this image, your answer might not be wrong. Cheto rubbed Huimao's head before he got up, and went back to looking for other intermediate robots to read their memories. Not far away, old Emo was resting on a rock. When he saw this scene, he patted Sillin on the shoulder and pointed at Cheto, who was reading the robot's memories. How the hell did you build a guy like that? Sillin rubbed his forehead. I doubt it even now. Cheto's learning ability was just too amazing. Moreover, he didn't just learn a lot from life and interpersonal relationships. More importantly, he loved to read books, and there was no limit to what kind of books he could read. Back then, he could read an ancient classic literature appreciation book that the affiliated school students couldn't even be bothered to touch, and he could discuss all kinds of entertainment and pastimes with the students for an entire night. In fact, he had even taught Wuxia psychology before. Actually, Sillin, the question I want to ask you the most is, will your cat grow into something even more troublesome? Cheto was a relatively rational person. This was because of his very nature, but Wuxia's nature was different. The so-called rationality of a machine couldn't even compare to a fish biscuit in its eyes. Sillin didn't know that the cat's mind was different from that of a robot or an animal. The reason Cheto was able to read the memories of the Robert family robots was probably because Sillin had used the Robert family's first-generation liquid core brain when he built Cheto. Although the liquid core brain inside Cheto's head was completely different from before, he still knew some of the Robert family's technology better than anyone else. 2 days later, the Freedom Army was more or less done with their business, and the 11th Squad was ready to return home. They had gained a lot from this trip, and it was all thanks to the 11th Squad. Without the 11th Squad, the number of people who would have made it back alive could be counted on one hand. The rest of the wreckage was dealt with by the Freedom Army as well. A lot of precious metals could be recovered from the wreckage, and it was also something the Freedom Army lacked. Of course, Sillin wasn't going to fight them for it. The materials Shikai had brought back from Miss Bodhisattva and Sillin himself were enough for the 11th Squad to use for a very long time. Thank you, everyone. I owe you another favor. I know I was the one who told you about this place, but I would have died without you. Thank you. Alkinthus said. You're welcome. It's a cooperation, everyone. I'll keep an eye on this planet for you. All right. Although most of the mineral deposits on this planet had been mined, there were still some that could be used as bait. Millions of years later, this kind of energy ores might appear on this planet again. After the Freedom Army left, Sillin told everyone to get ready to depart. Moon and the others had dealt with the traces of the Shi family on the planet a long time ago, so they didn't need anyone else to do it. They also didn't need to worry that someone else might discover something about the Shi family. As for the secrets of the energy ores on this planet, Moon didn't need to tell Sillin. Sillin already knew that the Shi family had more than one planet as an experiment site. The undiscovered energy ores were probably kept for the Shi family's future use. Everyone returned to the starship parked outside the planet. This time, they had an inhuman with them. There were many projectors on the starship, so they could see the White Spirit from many places. The Super AI Little 11 on the starship had also gained a new companion to communicate with. Sillin sat in the break room and went through the information he had gathered during this trip. At the same time, he was thinking about the water bomb. How powerful would the water bomb be in an environment where there wasn't enough water? Sillin had tried it on the planet with the energy ores before. The crystallization process was very slow, and the effect wasn't great. He couldn't unleash its full power at all. Moreover, the crystals weren't pure either. Once they were impure, the crystal's hardness would decrease, and they would shatter easily. What if it wasn't a water bomb, but something else? After calculating for a long time, Sillin finally gave up. He couldn't think of a way to succeed just yet. Lying down on the chair, Sillin took a deep breath and relaxed himself. Then he turned around and saw Huimao sleeping so soundly beside the table that his neck was dangling over the edge of the table. He had no idea how he could sleep so soundly in such a position. Huimao had fallen silent for a while after Cheto had said those words to him, but it was only for a very short time. After that, Huimao had reverted to his old self and even pried open Carrie's locker. After stretching his limbs a bit, Sillin walked out of the break room and went to discuss his future plans with Yudi. Sillin immediately saw Cheto sitting there reading a book the moment he walked out of the door and turned a corner. This guy often sat there reading books, and because he wasn't disturbed by Snowball and the others playing around, very few people passed by this place. It was quiet and close to Cheto's own room. Suddenly, Cheto said, "Don't waste your energy. You can't infect me." The white spirit appeared next to him right after Cheto finished speaking. Cheto's gaze moved from the book in his hand to the white figure next to him. "You can't infect me as long as I don't agree to it." The white spirit stared at Cheto for a while before pointing at the book in his hand. "Why do you want to read these things? They can be firmly memorized through data transfer. What I enjoy is the process, because I can learn a lot of things through this process. And in the process, I can feel that I'm not a rigid machine." The white spirit didn't quite understand Cheto's words. It was because Ayu had told her that they were advanced robots that were different from normal rigid robots. Therefore, she couldn't understand what Cheto was saying. Noticing the white spirit's confusion, Cheto flipped his palm and revealed a white interface. Let's take drawing as an example. If I want to draw a sea beast, the image of a sinister-looking sea beast appeared on the white interface. Its wide dorsal fin cut through the waves like a giant blade and rose straight into the sky. Is this a drawing? No, it's not. This is a direct reflection of the information in my head. I didn't draw it. While saying this, Cheto took out a pen and a drawing clip from his backpack beside the bench. He put down the book in his hand and placed the drawing clip on his knees. Then he flipped to a blank page and started drawing with the pen. The charcoal brush carried an ancient charm as it slowly drew a silhouette. Then, the silhouette turned from blurry to exquisite, and the sea beast slowly took shape. The white spirit watched quietly from the side. She seemed to be starting to understand something. However, she was an incorporeal body, and she was used to conveying information through virtual projection. She couldn't walk and move freely like Cheto and Ayu. Her range of activity was always limited to a virtual world, and even her body was incorporeal. It was like a soul without a body. Do you want to give it a try? Cheto looked at the white spirit with a smile. How? It was still the same cold voice, but this time there was a hint of hope in it. Cheto raised the hand holding the pen. The hand that was originally identical to a human's gradually changed color, until it was almost the same silver color as a crude robot's. The white spirit was stunned for a moment before she sat down next to Cheto. She reached out and touched the silver arm. Then the two arms overlapped. Cheto once said that no one could infect him without his permission. No virus or program could infect him. However, he had removed the seal on one of his arms and allowed the white spirit's hand to attach itself to it. It looked like the arms of two people had overlapped. The silver arm slowly turned back to the same color as a human's, and there was a white shadow on the arm. It looked like a pair of hands holding a white palm, and the two hands were holding a pen. Next to the completed sketch of the sea beast, a rather exaggerated but cute little drawing slowly appeared. It was a picture of blue skin swinging its tail while standing upright. Its mouth was wide open and spraying water. Standing at the corner, Sillin smiled when he saw it. Just as he was about to leave, he felt a weight on his shoulder. Oh, Cheto is hitting on a girl. Cat's eyes widened. They're drawing blue skin? Why not me? Sillin grabbed Fat Cat, who was about to go over and cause trouble, and walked to the other side of the passage. Meow, I'm going to tell Moon and the others. After Sillin dragged him out of the passage, Huimao ran off to gossip with Moon and the others. The Miantuan hurriedly followed him and grabbed Cat's tail. Then Huimao ran away with him. "Oh, Silin, you came just in time. I was just about to notify you," said Yudi when he came out of the command room. Silin walked into the command room, and Yudi showed him the encrypted message he had just received. There was no actual content in the message. It was just a signal band, and the message was for Silin to contact them through it. Silin adjusted the parameters of the command room's communicator, using the decoded signal band. Then a human figure appeared on the light screen. "I was wondering when you would be able to contact us. Hee long time no see, kid." Silin frowned. He didn't think he had seen this person before, but Silin remembered the voice. What a surprise! Chapter 383. The man looked very ordinary. His clothes and appearance were ordinary, and he did not have the kind of aura that could be felt even through the communicator's screen. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged uncle in the middle of a crowd. That was all. However, this person was the person Silin had been searching for the answer to his doubts. Back when he was in the Grade 1 prison of Sector S, the semi-conscious Silin had heard this voice, and the voice had even hypnotized him. At the time, whenever Silin tried to recall the situation before he fainted, he would be affected by this voice and unable to calmly analyze what happened at the time. It was true that Silin had never seen this person in person, but Silin remembered this voice very clearly. Moreover, although this person did not rescue Silin back then, he did not kill Silin directly either. Wuxia incognito? Silin looked at the person on the screen. "Yo, you know me." The uncle on the screen smiled, scooped a spoonful of ice cream into his mouth and smacked his lips. "I remember your voice, and then I made some deductions based on what happened later," Silin answered. Although things didn't go too smoothly at Sector S back then, Silin did admire Wuxia Incognito quite a bit. Wuxia Incognito, the leader of the organization Wuxia. He was also the assassin organization Wuxia that he led. Together with Mist, they were known as the two top assassin organizations in the entire League of Stars. Because they were so special, these two assassin organizations basically did not participate in other assassin organization rankings. The difference in strength and influence was too great, and these two organizations were like the glory and code of electronic media publications. They were lonely at the top. Why would a person who could directly go against Azrael seek him out now? Silin did not understand. The uncle who finished his ice cream touched the cream stuck to his beard and said, "The first time we met was inside that prison of Sector S, right? The time you were beaten half to death by the Blue Phantom." Silin. How direct. The Blue Phantom, that Wuxia mentioned, should be the woman with the blue light blade. Beaten half to death. Yudi looked at Silin. He really didn't know that Silin had been beaten so badly. "In fact, you were the one who caused me to be in such a miserable state," said Celine. At that time, he really couldn't beat the blue succubus, but if Silin's guess was right, the one who dealt the final blow was indeed this uncle who had just finished eating his ice cream and was wiping his mouth. The uncle on the screen was stunned. "Didn't you get beaten up by the blue charm? I remember that I usually don't fight with people whose strength is too far apart." Silin and Yudi. At that time, Silin's strength was indeed a little lacking. However, to Yudi, Silin's strength at that time was very powerful even in the 6th division. The difference in strength was too great. This was really a blow to him. "I also remember that I had already escaped, but I was pulled back the moment my feet touched the ground," Silin said slowly. Wuxia patted his head as if he was thinking hard. 5 seconds later, Uncle Ian waved his arm. My memory is bad because of my age. I don't remember." Silin and Yudi. "Then why are you sending us this message now? There are many people here who are much weaker than you," Silin said. "That's not it. I just heard that you guys taught that kid from the Robert family a lesson. Oh, and I helped you silence him. Shouldn't you thank me?" Borat was dead? Silin and Yudi looked at each other. What they cared about was not whether Borat had been silenced, but how did Wuxia's people find out about what happened here, and how did they coincidentally encounter the escaping Borat? Did Wuxia already have his eyes on Borat and the others, or were they the ones who had their eyes on them? They had their eyes on Borat and used someone else to get rid of the main force, then waited outside to get rid of the fish that escaped the net. But if they had their eyes on the 11th squad from the start, after some thought, Sillin said, "You're really far-sighted." Uncle Ian chuckled and cupped his hands. "You flatter me. You've been watching us, haven't you?" Sillin said. "Yes." Uncle Ian did not hide anything from him. "It's just that I couldn't find you, kid. I only saw your robot substitute a few times." It seemed that Wuxia came prepared and had done a detailed investigation on the 11th squad. "You haven't told me why you're looking for us." "The 11th squad is just a small squad in Vanguard, and it's only been established recently. Like you said, the difference in strength between us is too great, so there shouldn't be much interaction." Difference in strength. Uncle Ian rubbed his chin. "If I remember correctly, a couple of my subordinates suffered at your hands before. For example, Rhapsody on a rainy night?" During their rescue mission, Sillin and the others had run into members of Wuxia, namely Liquid Silver, Stora, and Judy. The trio had failed to gain any advantage over Cheto and Shusag, and Judy had suffered a setback as well. Back then, Liquid Silver and the others had gone to Miracle Corporation's base to complete their mission, and when they returned, they looked like a mess. Everyone in Merciless was very surprised because they had never seen them in such a sorry state before. Later on, after Liquid Silver and the other two explained the incident in detail to Uncle Ian, he managed to gather some information and put the blame on Sillin. Although Shusag had reverted to his original appearance during the investigation, Liquid Silver was still able to recognize him. He didn't look like the man they'd met at the base. The more they investigated the 11th squad, the more puzzled they became. Why did it feel like this squad was full of secrets? Why would the captain use a robot as a substitute? Wuxia hadn't run into Sillin or Cheto at all during their investigation. It was precisely because of this that Wuxia was even more curious. The fact that they were able to beat Wuxia's men proved that they were capable people. He didn't think that a small squad of the Big Four would be able to infiltrate Miracle's base and mess with his subordinates. "Let's meet up. There are some things I need to tell you in person," Uncle Ian said with a sincere expression. "Are you going to jump out of nowhere if I say no?" Before Wuxia could answer, Sillin said, "Level 1 search." Wuxia still didn't understand what Sillin meant. A short while later, Judy walked over and pointed to the side with an embarrassed look on her face. Wuxia turned around and saw a line of words appearing on a screen in the command room. "I found you." After Sillin issued the Level 1 search order, Moon, Sigma, Cheto and the others would step in and help if the starship couldn't find the target. Sillin didn't believe that anyone could escape from their combined efforts. Sure enough, in less than 10 seconds, the spacecraft hidden in a large gas star-shaped group of satellites was dug out. "Heh, this is interesting. Piglet, you've been messed with twice already," Wuxia said to Judy next to him. Judy's face turned from green to red, and then from red to black. "Boss, can you call me something else?" "I can't." After that, Wuxia turned around and continued chatting with Sillin as if nothing had happened. At the same time, he gestured for his subordinates to fly the spaceplane over. The atmosphere in the 11th squad grew heavy when they learned that the target was Wuxia, one of the two great assassin organizations. Hui Mao, Xueqiu and the other gluttons were the only exceptions. Carrie's hands were shaking a little. It wasn't from fear, but excitement. "Wuxia. That's Wuxia. I can't believe I've been a hunter for so many years. I can't believe that I'm able to get this close to a Wuxia, and it's the legendary hidden Wuxia assassin." Carrie panted heavily, but he couldn't suppress his excitement. Unlike hunter regiments or assassin organizations, the Mist and Wuxia were too mysterious. Although they were notorious, Carrie was more interested in the Mist and Wuxia than Azrael. Xiaoshang was still a little worried. After all, he had heard of the name Wuxia a long time ago. When he first became a hunter, these two assassin organizations were nothing more than legends to new hunters like him. Even after these two organizations became more high-profile, he still didn't think about getting close to them. After all, these two assassin organizations had always set their sights high. They were people who could even assassinate politicians from the League of Stars and military bigwigs. Xiaoshang could only admire them. "Aren't you guys worried?" Ba Dao glanced at his companions and asked. Mogaz was just as excited as Carrie. In fact, he didn't look worried at all. Although some of the others were worried, they were all looking forward to it. What's there to be afraid of? How about I protect you guys? But I'll charge you a protection fee. Hui Mao spread his wings and flew around in a circle. Forget it. I haven't even settled the score with you for breaking into my locker yet, Carrie said while tidying up his equipment. Oh right, Shusag. Did you say that you ran into Wuxia's men head-on before? Carrie asked. Yeah. Cheto fought them too. What happened? I'm standing right here, aren't I? Shusag flicked the corner of his shirt. They're pretty strong, but there's no need to be afraid. I might not be able to defeat them, but Cheto can. If it weren't for Silin's communication, he probably would have taken out one of them already. Shusag's words caused the mouths of the players who were sorting out their equipment to fall into an O shape. So the real badass had always been around them, and he was keeping a low profile. Everyone was ready to fight, but Wuxia's spaceplane didn't get too close to Silin's group. Maybe it was out of habit or something else, but Wuxia's spaceplane stopped a certain distance away from them. Silin continued chatting with Wuxia through the screen. Let's have a match. If you win, I'll tell you something, Wuxia said. What kind of news? Silin asked. Vanguard, of course. Why would I waste my breath? Wuxia answered. Not far behind Wuxia, Liquid Silver and the others curled their lips at the same time. You're always full of nonsense, aren't you? How do you want to compete? Silin asked again. Wuxia looked outside the spaceplane and said, 2 people from each side. Space combat. Space combat? No, naked combat. Silin didn't know what to say. On Wuxia's side, Liquid Silver and the others face-bombed. In the end, it was Judy who corrected them. Boss, they don't understand what we're saying. Uncle Kane explained. It's a common saying in our organization. It means fighting in space without using a spaceplane. Just using protective suits or something. After Wuxia's explanation, Silin asked, Location? Wuxia waved his hand, and an image popped up. It was the scene outside. The asteroid belt over there. It's close and the venue is good. There's no electromagnetic storm. What a great opportunity. What if we lose? Yudi asked worriedly. He knew a lot about Wuxia. And it was precisely because he knew more than Carrie and the others that Yudi was more worried. Win or lose, there was one thing that couldn't be denied. They were relying on them. Lose. If you lose, then pay us some money. Give us some of the energy ores you just obtained. Not much. Just 20% of what you have will be enough, Wuxia said. Yudi looked at Silin. What do you think? We accept. But I still want to ask, is there only one match? Silin asked Wuxia. Just one match. More than that is a waste of time. Are you going to fight? Of course not. Why would I get involved in a child's game? A child's game? Yudi was helpless at this description, but the other party was Wuxia. As long as Wuxia didn't show up, it should be fine, right? Wuxia gave Silin and the others 10 minutes to prepare and decide who to send. Who's going? Emoheng asked. Old Emo was worried. They had finally ended a fight, but they had to face such an opponent before they could even return home. Old Emo knew a lot about Wuxia because of his son, so he had naturally heard of Wuxia. Being a hunter really wasn't easy. I'll go. Although he was mentally prepared, Emoheng still couldn't help but worry. There were plenty of capable fighters in the 11th squad, and they could join the fray as well. What if something happened to Silin himself? After all, the other party was Wuxia's man. At the end of the day, Old Emo was still selfish. He didn't want Silin to take the risk. It's fine. I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing? That's what you say every time. Old Emo waved his hand and sat down helplessly. What about the other person? Yudi asked. Silin looked out the door and shouted. We's go out and fight. All right. Hui Mao, who had been waiting outside, flapped its wings and flew in. It looked like it was in a good mood. Emoheng didn't know what to say anymore. Hui Mao was a stubborn man. Once he made up his mind, he wouldn't be able to change his mind. As for this cat, well, forget it. 10 minutes later, the screen came back on. How is it? Have you decided? Wuxia asked. Yes, we can start at any time, Silin said. All right, let's begin. As soon as Wuxia finished speaking, one of the spaceplane's doors opened and 2 people flew out. Sillin didn't know who the 2 people on Wuxia's side were. They were wearing protective armor, but unlike normal armor, it was probably made by Wuxia himself. It belonged to the space camouflage category, and there were many thrusters and acceleration devices installed on it. Although it wasn't as light as Shimu's armor, it wasn't too far off. From the looks of it, Wuxia's people often wore this kind of protective armor in space battles. Let's go. Sillin patted Huemao's shoulder and walked toward the hatch. Sillin's decision might seem hasty, but he had his own plans. Although he hadn't come into contact with Wuxia much in the past, he had learned a lot about him. Shi Huajing and Lung had told him a lot of things about Wuxia just now, and Mo Hung had told him some things about Wuxia. Since Wuxia was waiting for them, it meant that he was prepared. He wasn't asking for his opinion, so he couldn't turn him down even if he wanted to. Sillin also told Yudi about his plans for all kinds of unexpected situations. He believed that with Yudi's capabilities, he wouldn't disappoint Sillin if something really did happen. Moreover, Cheto and the others were ready to take action as soon as Sillin gave the signal. Moreover, there was a squad of mechanical soldiers on the starship that could fight in space. Huimao transformed into his human form at the hatch's entrance. Every time he transformed into this form, he would feel a sense of pride and arrogance. Awe-inspiring, truly awe-inspiring. Flapping his wings, Huimao turned around and called out to Sillin, "Let's go." The hatch opened, and Sillin jumped onto Huimao's back and grabbed Huimao's ears. The man and the cat left the starship together. The venue was the asteroid belt not far away from them. Fat Cat flew over with Sillin and stopped on one of the asteroids. Then, she looked at the 2 people standing on another small asteroid. Inside the command room on Wuxia's side, everyone was staring at the image on the big screen. "It really is him and that cat," Judy said. Just now, they were discussing whether Cheto or that strange cat would be the one Cheto was going to fight. During their investigation of the 11th squad, there was a video of the cat flying in space after its transformation. That was why they had made a bet on it. Wuxia had bet on Huimao's side, and Liquid Silver and the others had bet on Cheto's side. After all, they had seen how terrifying Cheto was. In the end, Cheto was the cat. To be honest, that cat is pretty impressive. Is it the legendary cyborg? Judy asked. That's right. Moreover, it's different from the failed products of those researchers. This cyborg life form is very stable. As Wuxia spoke, he glanced at the little fellow who was standing next to a small cup of ice cream and chewing on it. What do you think? The little fellow looked like a mouse, but it had a long furry tail and a pair of big bright eyes. Right now it was scooping ice cream from the cup with a small spoon. Hearing Wuxia's words, the little fellow wiped away the cream stuck to its whiskers and said, "I see." Then it buried its head back into its food. Cheto's gaze moved away from the little fellow. Although they had seen the cat before, it had never shown itself in this form before. If it had shown itself at that time, it would have attracted a lot of attention. Sillin sure hid that cat well. Over at the asteroid belt, Sillin made a pause gesture just when the enemy was about to make their move. Then he asked, "Are there any weapons restrictions?" The duo paused for a moment and didn't say anything. A while later Wuxia replied, "Don't bring out that arrogant lightning shooting cannon of yours. We don't have anything like that anyway." In other words, anything except that weapon was fine. Sillin jumped down from Huimao's back, and his armor automatically attached to the asteroid. The 2 opponents flew over from the opposite planet the moment Sillin made his move. Because of the acceleration of the protective armor, it only took a blink of an eye for them to land a few meters away from Sillin. "Is it okay this time?" the other party asked. It was hard to tell whether it was a man or a woman, nor could it tell their age. It was neither fast nor slow, and there were no loopholes. Do you assassins know how to wait for the start before killing? As soon as Sillin's words fell, the other party made their move. Being able to wait for the other party to be ready in this space station was also giving Sillin face. Just like Wuxia said, this was just a competition, not an assassination. Sillin moved his hand, and the slender long knife appeared. Sillin didn't intend to hide this. He believed that with Wuxia's ability, he should know something. Even if he wasn't sure, he would still suspect Sillin. The other party's figure disappeared in a flash. When the two knives collided, only a brief flash of light could be seen. The next moment, a similar flash appeared in another place. When the other party lashed out with the spiked whip, Huimao transformed back into his fat kitten form under everyone's dumbfounded gazes. Huimao's behavior surprised the members of the 11th squad. Huimao had always thought that the ferocious form was the most suitable for Lord Cat. Before the battle, Lord Cat would show off his ferocious form, and most of the time, Huimao would appear in that form, just like when he was fighting the robots. But why would he transform back in front of everyone? Inside the aircraft, Wuxia, who was holding a cup of ice cream, paused for a moment before he smiled. Piglet, that kid is so cunning. How can he hide so well? Everyone wanted to see how Huimao would fight in that form. But Sillin had already told Huimao to transform back as soon as the battle started. With Huimao's speed, there was no way he would be injured. Even if he ran a lap around the asteroid belt, he wouldn't be caught. Sillin was confident in this. What puzzled Sillin was why Wuxia wanted to force Huimao out. Wuxia didn't arrange this so-called sky battle to see the combat power of the other members of the 11th squad. If he really wanted to see it, why didn't he choose a planet to fight on land? Why did he choose to fight in space? Sillin thinks that something suddenly occurred to him when he saw Wuxia pick up another cup of ice cream. Sure, Huajing had told Sillin that there was someone in Wuxia who was very interested in cyborgs. Chapter 384. Over at the asteroids, Sillin was blocking one attack after another. His opponent's movements were quick, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of discomfort or awkwardness in this kind of environment. It was almost as if his movements had become one with the armor he was wearing. Every time his armor accelerated, it was just right, not too early, not too late, and not in the slightest. His opponent was already fast to begin with, and with this acceleration, his attacks became even more powerful. Moreover, if he were to use an assassination technique, his chances of success wouldn't be any lower than if he were in a normal environment. This was Wuxia's killer move. No matter what the environment was like, he would always be able to maintain his peak performance and not be limited by the environment. Sillin's armor didn't have this acceleration function, but it did allow Sillin to remain unaffected by the environment. Every step he took, every jump he made, every step he took, he would move as if he were in a place with normal gravity. Blade light flashed, and the dagger-like knife that was blocked by Sillin's longsword curved strangely in the next moment. Then, it bypassed the longsword like a venomous snake and shot straight between Sillin's brows. Celine leaned to the side and lowered her body. Her longsword pierced through her back and blocked the snake-like blade gleam. The light from the crisscrossing blades flashed again. Inside the 11th Squad starship, everyone was staring intently at the screen. The more they watched, the stranger they felt. After looking at the screen for a while, Yudi breathed a sigh of relief. Sillin shouldn't be in any danger anymore. While Sillin was worried, the gray cat wasn't making any progress on its side either. Its running skills were too good, and the whip-wielding man was starting to feel a little helpless as he chased after it. The cat was fast, and it would run for a while before turning around to see if the man had caught up to it. If they hadn't, it would scratch them once before continuing to run again. I think that guy must be feeling pretty depressed right now, Carrie commented as he watched the whip-wielding man chase after Huimao. Xiaoshang and Mogaz nodded in agreement. The tension in the air had lessened significantly. It's too rare, it's really too rare. Phoebe exclaimed excitedly. What's too rare? Carrie and the others looked at Phoebe in confusion. It's the one with the whip. My idol. In fact, my use of the whip was also influenced by Taipana. I was fortunate enough to see it once when I was with the main team. Phoebe explained. You've seen that guy? No, to be precise, the whip flashed by, and the target's head was pierced through, and he fell straight down, Phoebe said. Phoebe was quite excited at the thought of that experience. Because of that shock, Phoebe later chose to use a whip as a weapon. However, she didn't choose the exact same whip as Taipanahan's because she wasn't used to it and it wasn't suitable for her. In the end, she still chose this knuckle whip. After a few years, seeing Taipanahan again, Phoebe still couldn't suppress her excitement. She actually saw her idol again. It was still so clear. Although she still couldn't see the face, Phoebe was already satisfied. Taipanahan. Taipanahan. Yudi thought for a moment. There was not much information about Wuxia. He also knew that there was such a person in Wuxia, but not every name could be matched. Wuxia always appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Most of the people in this organization had never seen their true faces. In the name of Taipanahan, Nahan was his real name. Taipanahan was just his code name. Taipanahan was a type of snake. This type of snake was quite venomous, and its continuous attack speed was extremely fast. Once the code name was connected to the person, one would know what kind of person it was as soon as they heard the code name. However, even this venomous and fast snake was a headache when it encountered Huimao. When Silin blocked the attack and retreated out of the opponent's attack range, he looked in Huimao's direction and saw the cat bite the whip. The sharp spikes on the whip retracted after Huimao bit the whip, and were replaced by a flash of electricity. The electricity flowed along the whip and quickly spread to Huimao's body. "Oh my god, meow." Huimao let go of the whip and retreated, his face a little twisted. The corner of Silin's mouth twitched when he saw Huimao's expression. He swung his saber and parried the attack from the person behind him, then rushed toward Huimao's side. The person fighting Silin paused for a moment, then chased after Huimao in the end. Whether it was the people on the 11th Squadron starship or those on Wuxia's side, everyone was puzzled by the actions of the man and cat. Could it be that the cat had been struck dumb by the electricity on the whip? Was that why Silin rushed over, because he was worried about Huimao? That was what most people thought. However, the truth was always out of everyone's expectations. Silin's speed grew faster and faster. Just as Huimao's whiskers began to tremble, Silin jumped into the air and jumped behind Huimao. Just as Silin jumped, Huimao opened his mouth. Puff, like a torrential rain, a pile of metal fragments sprayed out of Huimao's mouth and shot toward the two people on the other side. The duo was a little flustered by the sudden turn of events, and they didn't even have time to jump out of the way. They swung their weapons to block the metal shards, but the amount of metal shards Whis had spat out was simply too much. Moreover, it was urgent, fast, and sudden. It really did put them in a difficult position for a moment. The metal fragments were not in their original state. Many of them were half-melted and had some unknown substance stuck to them. It was definitely not human gastric juice. It was a disgusting sight. Seeing this scene, Wuxia spat out the ice cream in his mouth. What the hell did this cat eat? While speaking, Wuxia poked the little guy on the table, who was holding a spoon with its front paws and staring at the screen in a daze. "Won't you get indigestion from eating that stuff?" The little guy's whiskers trembled, but he didn't say anything. On the other side, after Huimao spat out the ice cream, he sneezed twice. Another wave of metal fragments sprayed out, but it was a lot better than before. Smacking his lips, Huimao stroked the fur around his mouth, then tilted his head and scratched the base of his ears with his hind legs. The two people who had just blocked the hidden weapons suddenly stopped and turned to look behind Huimao. There, Silin was pointing the Purgatory Thunder Snake K at them. The two looked at each other, then put away the tools in their hands and retreated. If they were on a real battlefield, Silin would definitely have opened fire while the other party was dodging the hidden weapons. With Silin's marksmanship, even if they didn't both get shot, at least one of them would get shot. If the person who fired was someone else, they might not have stopped so quickly. However, this person was Silin. According to the information they received, Silin was a very mysterious person. Moreover, the gun in his hand gave them a very dangerous feeling. Assassins had always trusted their instincts. Therefore, they didn't need much time to think before they decisively retreated. Anyway, their mission was completed. Although this so-called space battle didn't turn out very well, the two believed that Boss Ian had found the answer. Space battle? What a joke. Why would assassins play this kind of game, where they openly fought? Were they playing monkeys? Even if they practiced, they would use assassination missions to practice. This kind of thing could only be used as a pastime. Their space battles always ended with the death of the target. This so-called space battle was just an excuse for Boss Ian to find the answer. The two of them were just here to play. That was all. This is the end. Everyone in the starship was stunned. It was over just like that? They felt like they had been tricked. Silin put away his gun and patted Huimao, who was licking his claws. Let's go. Don't eat random things in the future. I didn't eat random things. It was just that I suddenly felt like vomiting when I was electrocuted. I ate too much. Those robots are really disgusting. I haven't even finished digesting them. Huimao transformed into his powerful mode and carried Silin back to the starship. Silin, did you guess from the beginning that the other party wasn't going to be serious? Huimao asked. I had that feeling. Also, if my opponent was in the middle of an assassination, his telescopic knife should be black and not reflect light. It's just that because of the nature of this space station, the other party didn't use that kind of assassination tool. Think about it. As the boss of an assassin organization, Wuxia, why would he suggest such a childish method of competition? Then what does that old man want? It's probably because of you. Me? What does he want with me? Huimao exploded. It hated being someone else's research subject. It might not necessarily be you. I heard that there's a person in Wuxia who likes to eat ice cream. He's very interested in cyborgs, and Wuxia also likes to eat ice cream. He was eating it during our previous conversations. So, it should be him. Huimao was silent for a moment, then said, Silin, why don't we eliminate that old man first? Silin pulled on Huimao's ear. Don't even think about it. That old man is very cunning. After returning to the 11th Squad starship, Huimao Wuxia was waiting in front of the holographic screen. Alright, you win this time. Wuxia's tone was very casual. It was almost as if he was saying, fine, you can drink this extra cup of water. Huimao squatted on Silin's shoulder and stared at Wuxia with hostility. The more he looked at this old man, the more cunning he felt. Due to Huimao's intense gaze, Wuxia put down the ice cream in his hand and asked, Little fat cat, do you have something against me? Huimao raised his chin. I know you're plotting something against me. After a pause he said, Are you going to do something improper to me? Huimao Wuxia. The little guy sitting on the table next to Huimao Wuxia also widened his eyes. Was this cat's brain still working? Silin flicked Huimao's ear. That last line shouldn't be used in this situation. I told you not to watch those pornographic films like you. You'll turn into an idiot if you watch too many of them. Huimao swung his tail in annoyance and harumphed. Alright, let's get back to business. I said I would tell you something if you won, so I'll fulfill my promise now. Huimao Wuxia straightened his face and said, This information is about several core members of Vanguard. Someone is going to assassinate the higher-ups of Vanguard. And there are at least 10 people on their hit list. As for whether Jifeng is on that list or not, I'm not sure. Assassinate the higher-ups of Vanguard? Fog. Silin only thought of this assassin organization that was on par with Huimao Wuxia. The other assassin organizations wouldn't have the guts to do something like this. Correct. Why didn't you tell Captain Jifeng? Why should I tell Jifeng? Uncle Ian said casually. However, if he told Silin, Silin would definitely tell Jifeng. Huimao Wuxia didn't care if Jifeng knew about this. Silin thinks for a moment and said, I'll tell the captain about this. Is there anything else? Not for now. Oh, there's one more thing. I'm very interested in the cat on your shoulder, but don't worry, I won't do anything to it. In fact, in some ways, I'm on the same side as you. After saying this, Huimao Wuxia hung up. The aircraft also flew away and soon disappeared from everyone's sight. On the same side? Silin still didn't understand the true meaning of Huimao Wuxia's words. By the time he understood, the two of them were already engaged in a fierce battle. Inside Huimao Wuxia's aircraft, the little guy who had finished another big cup of ice cream was already squatting in Huimao Wuxia's arms and dozing off. His long, furry tail was wrapped around his body, and he looked very satisfied. Huimao Wuxia stroked the snow-white fur of the little guy in his arms and said, How is it? How do you feel? This sentence wasn't directed at the little guy in his arms, but at the two people standing not far away. These two people were the ones who had gone out to fight Silin and Huimao. That guy is hiding his strength, the person beside Taipan Han said. He had fought with Celine for a period of time. Although he hadn't used his best skills and hadn't used his true strength, he could still see some things. Hiding his strength. Yes, I think there were 3 times when he could have killed me in one hit, but I don't know if it's because it was just a sparring match or something else, but he didn't use his full strength, the person said confidently. That's true, Wuxia said slowly. Even now no one knows how strong Sillin really is. Also, didn't you notice that he doesn't need to use force when he can? For example, the virus that caused the miracle, or the reason why the Skeleton King and his subordinates died a few years ago according to the information you've gathered. He didn't use force at all, he relied on other methods. He wasn't able to kill Osculo because of his combat prowess. There could be other factors as well. Actually, we all know that a person's combat prowess isn't that scary. What's scary is the ability to kill a large group of people without using any sort of combat prowess. Out of all the people we've come into contact with, people like that are the most dangerous because their destructive power is impossible to estimate. Not to mention, that kid has both. Also, I don't know what deal that kid made with Gaydar, but I know that Gaydar is the kind of person who won't care if the difference in strength is too big. Being able to talk to him and build a relationship means that Gaydar values Sillin a lot. Someone wanted to make a deal with Azrael for Sillin's life, but Azrael refused. Others thought it was because of Gaydar, but I think it was Sihuang who made the decision. Wuxia said this for his subordinates. He rarely spoke so much at once, but this time the people on the spaceplane would take it seriously. Sillin didn't know what Wuxia's people thought of him. After he contacted Ji Feng, he told him about his conversation with Wuxia. However, Ji Feng seemed to be prepared for this. It's time for them to make a move. The them he was referring to was the fog, and some related people. There were many things that Sillin didn't know about in Vanguard, and the huge movement in Vanguard last time wasn't just about Songba Leruo being ambushed. Maybe Ji Feng had already noticed something. Ji Feng told Sillin to be careful, and he would contact Wuxia. At the same time, he also told Sillin to be prepared. Since Wuxia came looking for him, it wouldn't be a simple test. He believed that they would meet again soon. Sillin agreed with Ji Feng's speculation. Ji Feng definitely knew more about Wuxia than Sillin. On the other hand, Sillin had a vague feeling that Ji Feng still had some thoughts that he hadn't told him, and those thoughts were related to him and Huimao. What do we do next, Sillin? Yudi asked. Other than the news brought by Wuxia, Ji Feng had also sent over some internal information regarding the other hunter regiments. Recently, the other 3 hunter regiments had been acting strangely. Something was brewing. Just like Ji Feng said, the hunter world of the League of Stars was probably going to undergo a great change. Now that they knew that the A Squadron of Vanguard would be in trouble, the entire hunter world would be making a big move soon. No one would be able to avoid it once the war began, and a small team like theirs wouldn't have much of an advantage. Of course, the best thing for them to do was to meet up with the other B squadrons and deal with the coming change together. Let's return to the base at Sector Z and make preparations, Sillin said. Alright, got it. Never fight a battle unprepared. Since they knew that a great change was coming, they had to arm themselves first. It was a good opportunity to get their hands on so many top-grade energy ores, and they could strengthen their weapons quite a bit. Moreover, they had to hurry. No one knew when the great change would erupt in the hunter world. While Sillin was pondering the information he just received, Ayu was poking his head around outside the command room. It was only after Sillin and Yudi were done discussing matters that Ayu flew in. What is it? Sillin asked. Sillin, have you been busy lately? Ayu looked a little nervous as he twirled his fingers. I won't be idle for the time being. Is there any trouble? Sillin said. Well, if you're busy, we can help you with it. However, we hope that you can spare some time to help us. Ayu continued to twirl his fingers. What kind of help? If it's urgent, I can help you first. That's great. After Sillin agreed, Ayu pulled Sillin and rushed towards the other end of the passage. What's the rush? Sillin ran after him. Hurry up and save me. Chapter 385. Sillin knew that Moon and Shimu were busy working on the box that Sigma was holding like a treasure. He thought that they would wait until they returned to the base before carrying out the awakening plan Moon mentioned. However, Sillin couldn't help but wonder why Moon was in such a hurry. Did something happen? No, that can't be right. Judging from Moon's reaction, it should be something good. Sillin followed Moon to Shimu's workshop on the starship. Shikai, Sigma, and the others were already waiting for him. The box was placed on a silver-gray metal workbench. There were 2 orbs of light floating inside the open box. Some data was flashing on the device next to them. Whis jumped onto the metal workbench and circled around the box twice. It could sense the machine language coming from the 2 balls of light, but it was very weak and incomplete. That was why there were only some messy data characters flashing on the instrument next to it, and they couldn't be connected into a string. What's going on? Sillin asked. They're awake. Sigma looked very excited. But we can't get in touch with them. Moon and I tried, but we can't get through to them. I don't know what's going on. Shimu, and the others had been busy retrieving the brains of Rifia and Zoel that Chip had kept. Back then, the Shi family had only used the materials and not the brains. At most, they had tried to replicate it, but the brains weren't seriously damaged. After all, the Shi family knew how important a brain was to a robot. Therefore, they could be awakened as long as the conditions were met. Moon and Sigma had been trying to communicate with the 2 core brain regions inside the box for a while now, but the 2 core brain regions didn't respond at all. But just now Moon and Shimu had just finished a game of Chain Stars. While the 3 of them were discussing the game, the 2 core brain regions suddenly reacted. The box on the metal table suddenly opened, and 2 clusters of light floated into the air. The instruments around them also reacted strangely. Moon told Celine about what happened just now, and his nervousness was obvious from his tone. The 2 orbs of light in the core brain region were reacting. Did this mean that the 2 of them could wake up? What should we do? Even Moon found it hard to calm down when he thought about Rufia and Zol's situation. Everything had happened too suddenly, and he had planned to deal with it after returning to the 11th Squad's base. He did not expect something to happen here. Fortunately, he had brought all the materials with him just in case. Did you encounter a similar situation when you were creating Cheto, Sillin? Shimu asked. Shimu was the one who asked you to bring Sillin over. He thought Sillin might be able to provide some advice. Back in the day, Sillin had done many calculations based on the advantages of the first-generation liquid core brain. It wasn't until Sillin was satisfied with the final results that Sillin was satisfied with. Adding that to the fact that he had discovered that miraculous crystal at the time, he had turned some of his theoretical designs into reality. That was how Cheto came to be after all sorts of coincidences. At the time, Cheto was nothing more than a newborn robot. He was like a newborn baby. His potential was there, but he didn't know much at all. After that, Cheto was the one who improved himself almost all the time. Right now, not even Sillin could understand the complicated structure of Cheto's brain. Sillin stared at the 2 floating balls of light. He hadn't created Cheto like this when he first created him. Maybe it was because Cheto had changed a lot during his development, but his initial state wasn't exactly the same. That being said, there were still similarities between the 2. After quietly sensing the information transmitted from the 2 light clusters, Sillin said, "This should be a normal phenomenon. It's just like how ordinary animals undergo a long period of hibernation. Due to the long period of hibernation, their brain activity has always been at an extremely low level. Even if they were to wake up, they would need to go through a period of adaptation. But these 2, Sillin pointed at the 2 light clusters in front of him, are in this adaptation period. They are not awake, but their brains have already begun to move." Shimu nodded. He was thinking the same thing, but he hadn't created an original robot himself. There were many things that only existed in theory. He wasn't as convincing as Sillin was. Sillin and Shimu discussed for a moment. Half an hour later, they came up with a plan. Sillin walked to the side and pointed at a certain direction. Then he said to Ayu, "Put the box inside Ayu." Shimu was already adjusting the apparatus in the direction Sillin was pointing at. Ayu carefully dragged the box and moved it into a transparent cylindrical cabin. It was the same cabin Shimu and Shikai used when they were making robots. Unlike the mass-produced ones, the one in Shimu's workshop was much more complicated in terms of configuration and parameters. After discussing with Sillin, Shimu decided to adjust some of the parameters. After Ayu put the box inside, Shimu pressed a button and closed the cabin door. Through the transparent wall, everyone could see the 2 balls of light floating inside. Cheto and the White Spirit also walked into the room. Sillin was the one who informed them to be cautious in case they needed more help when the time came. Moreover, Sillin also hoped that Cheto could learn more from this incident. It would be very helpful to Cheto, who was also a robot himself. Sillin and Ayu each took control of a couple of apparatus. After they were done adjusting the apparatus, Sillin shot Shimu a questioning look. After receiving an affirmative answer, they pressed the start button at the same time. The environment inside the cabin was changing rapidly. The composition of the ions, gases, pressure and temperature inside the cabin were changing rapidly, and the magnetic field was adjusting in a regular pattern. Both Sillin and Shimu stared closely at the icons and data displayed on the apparatus. They needed to make adjustments according to the data displayed. After a period of instability, the graphs and data on the apparatus finally calmed down. However, the 2 balls of light inside the cabin didn't show any obvious changes. Moreover, the line on the graph was rising very slowly, meaning that the 2 balls of light were awakening very slowly as well. This can't go on. Sillin thinks for a moment before saying to Ayu, "Try to communicate with them." Although there was a wall between them, it wasn't a problem for Ayu with his abilities. Ayu followed Sillin's instructions and tried to communicate with the 2 balls of light inside the cabin. However, the results weren't very good. The line on the graph was changing, but the change was too small to meet Sillin's expectations. Sillin frowned and fell into deep thought. From the corner of his eye, he saw the gray cat looking at the data displayed on the instrument, and some data symbols were flashing in its eyes. The fellow was just trying to decipher the disjointed data symbols created by the 2 balls of light on the instrument out of boredom, but it just so happened to give Sillin an inspiration. "Try to communicate with them using data stream mapping," Sillin said to Ayu. Shimu's eyes flashed when he heard Sillin's suggestion. He looked at Huimao and Sillin before turning back to the monitor. He didn't expect Sillin to be so much more powerful than he thought. His understanding of machine language was far beyond his expectations. It was because of this that Shimu knew how rare it was for humans to be able to understand machine language. Even among the Shi family, there might not be one in several generations. On the other hand, Celine, who was not a member of the Shi family, had a better understanding than Shikai, who was a true descendant of the Shi family. Ayu didn't pay attention to what Shimu was thinking. He was only concerned about the 2 balls of light inside the cabin. They were his brothers. He hadn't seen them for hundreds of years, and the 5 of them hadn't seen each other for 1,000 years. The arrogant Raffia, the cold Zoel, are they coming back? Ayu stared at the 2 balls of light inside the cabin. 2 beams of light shot out from his face. They contained all kinds of data. The streams of data were mapped onto the 2 balls of light. They contained information about the 5 robots and the Shi family of that generation. Ayu hoped to use this information to trigger a reaction in the brains of the 2 balls of light. Sure enough, after sensing the data stream mapping, the 2 light clusters flickered. After this flicker, the data on the monitoring instruments connected to the fusion cabin changed drastically. "Yes, that's it. Continue," Sillin said as he made some adjustments to the devices and the parameters calculated based on the new data. Both Shimu and Sillin had to make the necessary adjustments themselves. There were many times when a machine wasn't necessarily better than a human. For example, when it came to synthesizing robots, the creator was the dominant factor. Only after synthesizing a robot would they be able to develop their own robots. Shikai watched from the side. He didn't interfere because there was nothing he could do. Sillin and Shimu were more than enough to control the devices, and their control was very precise. This was something Shikai needed to learn. There was a certain gap between him and the 2 of them, and he didn't deny it. Sillin's hand speed was so fast that Shikai couldn't keep up with it. He had to rely on other visual aids to catch a glimpse of it. Sillin alone took care of 60% of the work, Shimu took care of 30%, and the remaining 10% was the work of Ayu, the 2 balls of light, and the automation of the devices. When the data displayed on the device reached one of Sillin's standards, the next step would begin. "All right, Ayu. Put the materials in." Sillin said to Ayu without stopping. Ayu also sensed that the two balls of light were becoming clearer and clearer. He sensed a familiar presence that he hadn't seen for a long time. After Sillin said that, Ayu quickly took out the materials he had been hiding and put them into the module's inlet. One of them was very similar to the material Sillin used to create Cheto. There were also a couple of extremely rare metals that Ayu had been hiding for a long time. Even the Shi family didn't know about them, and the only reason Ayu had taken them out was to awaken Wuxia and Zoel. The balls of light inside the module grew brighter and brighter. As they moved, the materials were absorbed, shaped, and synthesized on their own. From the beginning to the end, a robot similar to Ayu and Sigma was slowly taking shape inside the module. Wuxia, Zoel. Agitated, Sigma began to circle around the cabin, arms swinging up and down, unsure of what to do. Cheto didn't say a word as he watched Ayu and Cheto. However, he didn't miss a single detail. Everything, including the operation, the calculation rules, the optimal path, the optimal conditions, and so on. The main reason he was able to evolve to his current level was because of his own learning and application abilities. Sillin had told him on the day he created Cheto, "I'm only providing you with a starting point. How far you can go is up to you." Cheto was different from Sigma and his siblings. When Sillin and Huimao left for Mist Bodhisattva for the first time, Cheto had gone on a long journey. He used to walk with the crowd, sit in a coffee shop at a street corner, read an ancient book for an entire afternoon, and experience the life of a normal person. He used to do hard labor with the lowest rung of society. He used to live in a shipping container ghetto. He used to work with elites who were dressed up in a hurry. He used to work with the hunters who were considered unimportant by the four great powers. He used to travel through dangerous jungles and experience the urgency of a normal person facing a crisis. When the lanterns were first lit, the suburbs and the civilian district beyond the border started to grow quiet, and the romance inside the city started to go crazy. Cheto had experienced two completely different nights before. He was lying in a simple house in the civilian district and listening to the snoring of the old miner next door. He was also riding a hoverboard in the city and following the screaming youngsters through the flashing neon lights. It was only after these experiences that Cheto finally understood. Ah, so this is the life of a human. He wasn't a cold machine after all. Sillin had told him that he could create another robot, but there was only one Cheto. Cheto wasn't envious of Sigma's 5 siblings. He had brothers of his own, such as Whis, Sillin, and Carrie. They might be humans or cyborgs, but they were brothers who had gone through thick and thin with each other. They were brothers who he could entrust his back to. Moon and Sigma had always been praised by the 11th Squad and everyone who saw them, but Cheto had always kept a low profile. Most of the time, the 11th Squad had already treated him as one of their own instead of a robot. Huimao flicked his ears and yawned when he saw what was going on. Then he jumped onto Cheto's shoulder. Sillin was busy, so he didn't dare disturb Sillin. That was why he crouched on Cheto's shoulder instead. He wasn't interested in the two robots, and neither was he interested in them. After finding a suitable angle, Huimao leaned his head against Cheto's neck and dozed off. Chapter 386. The two robots inside the capsule had been perfected, and most of the work was done by the robots themselves. Sillin and Shimu didn't need to do anything else, so they simply sat on the side and watched the data displayed on the monitor. The two new robots were created based on the programming in their brains, and they looked very similar to Sigma and Moon. Why else would they call them brothers? When the two robots were done, the light bars on their faces flashed, and the cabin doors opened on their own. The change in air pressure made a hissing sound. The two new robots flew out of the capsule, and Sigma and Moon jumped toward them excitedly before they could say anything. After so many years, the four brothers were reunited once more. Chip was the only one left. Not wanting to interrupt the four brothers' bonding session, Sillin walked out of Shimu's workshop and went back to his own room to rest. Although the process of synthesizing these two robots wasn't long, the amount of calculation involved was just too great. This was especially true in the beginning. He was practically operating like a machine. Thankfully, things were a little easier towards the end, and Sillin had a buffer period. This time he was creating 2 robots at once, so it was only natural that the amount of calculation required was a lot more than before. Unlike the time when he created Cheto, most of the calculations were done in real time. After stretching his aching arms a little, Sillin walked back to his room. Huimao jumped off Cheto's shoulder the moment Sillin came out. He winked at Cheto and said, "I won't disturb you anymore, boy. You can pick up girls now." Cheto flicked Huimao's ear with a smile, and left Shimu's workshop as well. He had learned a lot of new things just now, and he needed time to think about them. The 11th squad had gained 2 new members, but it was a new problem for Shimu. It was fine back when Sigma and Moon were the only ones in the group. Moon was the only one who would speak from time to time, and Shimu didn't think much of it. Now that there were 2 more Sigma and Moon, Shimu didn't think much of it. Perhaps it was because the 4 of them were in a group, but the quiet Sigma and Moon seemed to have become more talkative, and they couldn't stop chatting. In the end, Shimu couldn't take it anymore and kicked all 4 of them out of the workshop. He really didn't know how that generation of Shi family members could tolerate these 5 troublemakers. Sometimes, the 4 of them would play a human pyramid with Sigma at the bottom. Sometimes, the 4 of them would mess around with Shueqiu and the others. Even a game of chess would turn into a war. Either way, the atmosphere on the 11th Squad starship was pretty good as of late. It was festive and lively, and the 4 robots kept Sigma's indoor orchard in perfect order. Not only that, but they also helped Mo Hung and Shikai a lot. Ji Feng had already contacted the 11B squadron commanders in secret, and told them everything that might happen. He told them to prepare themselves because it would be an incredibly difficult battle if an all-out war broke out. Other than that, Ji Feng also told Sillin about the meaning behind Wuxia's words. It was very likely that the fog would take advantage of this meeting to kill them, and this was the best opportunity for them. Therefore, Vanguard had more things to pay attention to. Ji Feng's biggest worry wasn't the navigator. After all, they were both part of the 4 great hunters, and both sides knew each other better than the other. Ji Feng's biggest worry was internal problems. Because the hunter regiments were too big, it was impossible to clean out all the traitors, and it wasn't impossible for the backlands to catch fire. The second concern was the assassin organization Fog. Their assassination targets were a few of Vanguard's higher-ups. Right now, they didn't know how many of Vanguard's higher-ups were on their hit list, but one thing was for sure. These higher-ups were the most influential people in Vanguard. If anything happened to any of them, it would be a huge loss for Vanguard. When the time came, the 11 squads definitely wouldn't be at the front lines. The A squadron would hold the front lines, and they would provide support from the rear. The big move that Ji Feng made during the last meeting at the base was actually because he had scattered some of the best seedlings among the various B squadrons. This was because they were less affected by the attacks in the B squadrons, and these people were the future hope of Vanguard. When they grew up, they would become another batch of peak strength. The dispersal and relegation this time was actually a kind of protection for these people. The abilities of these people were indeed uneven, and the people who were truly valued by the higher-ups were mixed among them. This was the main reason for the action that time. As it turned out, Ji Feng had already started making all kinds of arrangements since then. There will be a war between the 4 great hunters sooner or later. Lon Hudi and Heaven's Birth are currently at war, and Vanguard and Navigator can't possibly stop either. Once the war breaks out, both sides will lose a lot of people. That's why we have to protect those who haven't matured yet. If our seniors are unfortunate enough to fall in this war, at least we'll have someone to take over our position in the future. We won't allow Vanguard to decline. This was what Ji Feng told Sillin. He didn't tell all the other captains this, and he only told the people he truly trusted. At the same time, he was reminding Sillin that the 11th squad shouldn't go to the front lines, and that they should stay with the other squads. Mogaz Mao and the others were all potential members who hadn't matured yet, so they shouldn't be sent to the front lines. Sillin helped me protect them. That was what Ji Feng said before he disconnected the call. This puzzled Sillin a lot. Even if Mogaz and the others were people the higher-ups thought highly of, Ji Feng didn't necessarily care too much about them. While Sillin was puzzling over this, Wuxia sent him another message. I just received the news. I'm just informing you that someone in your squad is on the missed hit list. Be prepared. It might even be you. Remember to stay alive when the time comes." On the screen, Uncle Ian was happily munching on a box of ice cream. On top of his head was a small, furry animal that looked like a mouse. It had big ears, and was about the size of a rabbit. It stared at Scylla for a while before losing interest and hopping off to the side to play. "You don't know who it is either?" Scylla asked. "I won't tell you even if I do." Scylla. "Fine, let's change the question. Is there only one person on the hit list?" Scylla asked again. As far as I know, there's only one. However, if the assassin gets excited, he can take out a few more of them. That's why your squad has to worry, kid." Scylla fell silent for a moment. "Thank you for the reminder. Is there anything else?" "Nothing for now. Oh, if you can't handle it, you can hire someone from our organization to protect you." "What's the condition?" "That fat cat of yours." Scylla ended the call immediately. On the other side of the call, Wuxia bit his spoon of ice cream and rubbed the head of the little fellow who had jumped into his arms again. "It looks like this isn't going to be easy." Before returning to the base at Sector Z, Scylla observed the 5 Mogaz members for a bit. He had a feeling that the person on the missed hit list that Wuxia mentioned was one of the 5 new members of their squad. Ji Feng wouldn't have said something like that otherwise. As for who it was, Scylla didn't know. He had even talked to all 5 of them separately, but he couldn't find anything out of them. "They're hiding this well? Well, if I can't find them now, then I won't look for them for now." The starship had returned to the base at Sector Z, but they didn't have much time left. Everyone had learned about the current situation of the hunter regiments through various channels, even without Scylla's reminder. "Are we really going to fight navigators, Scylla?" Carrie rubbed his palms together eagerly. "Maybe. It's always good to be prepared," Scylla replied. I'll make sure to prepare as much as I can." Carrie dragged Xiaoshang and the others away to discuss how to fix navigators when the time came. "What are you worried about?" Yudi asked. Although an all-out war could break out, Yudi knew that a squad like the 11th Squad wouldn't be at the front lines. Therefore, they wouldn't be attacked as fiercely as they were. "I'm not worried about the navigators. With our team's strength, even if we can't get rid of many of the navigators, we can at least protect ourselves." However, when the time comes, the navigators might not be the only ones. Yudi's heart skipped a beat. "You mean an assassin organization?" Ever since they knew that there might be a large-scale battle, Rufia and Zoel, who had just woken up, started to equip themselves with battle equipment. Rufia, in particular, was a battle maniac. He often pestered Mo Hung to exchange some opinions and understand some of the current weapons in the Star Alliance. Kui Mao, on the other hand, was as carefree as ever. All he did was eat and sleep. While the 11th Squad was preparing, the other B squadrons were slowly making their way back to Sector Z. This meant that the time was drawing closer and closer. Scylla had contacted Shodan, who was currently with the A Squadron. According to Shodan, they didn't plan to make such a big fuss at first, and they didn't plan to recall all the B squadrons either. However, all kinds of rumors started to spread that Vanguard and Navigator were going to go all out against each other, and Navigator didn't deny it. In fact, they even recalled all the B squadrons under Navigator's command. No wonder they were notified in such a hurry. Ji Feng hadn't planned to involve all 11 squads in the first place. Just like Ji Feng said, the 11 squads were filled with hope for the future, and they were filled with a bunch of good seedlings who had yet to mature. Scylla was one of the first to learn about this. Ji Feng had informed Scylla about Wuxia beforehand, and Scylla was informed of the situation beforehand. "Scylla, this is going to be a difficult mission. You and your B squadrons must not be careless," Shodan said seriously. "I can already sense the tension in the A squadron's atmosphere. This mission is different from any previous one, and no one can tell what will happen when the time comes." "I know. Just join the 3rd B Squadron when the time comes," Shodan said. Right now, Shodan trusted the 3rd B Squadron even more than the 6th Division. Although he had risen from the 6th Division, the 6th Division was no longer the 6th Division it used to be. Moreover, the personnel structure was different due to the demotion. so Shotten's influence on the current 6th Division was negligible. Sillin understood what Shotten was trying to say. He was afraid that Sillin and the others would be at a disadvantage. If they were to join the 3rd B Squadron, they would be able to take care of the 3rd B Squadron. After all, everyone had a good relationship with each other. Not long after the call with Shotten, Sillin received another call from the 3rd B Squadron. They were probably aware of the 11th Squad situation. So they asked the 11th Squad to join them and take care of each other. Sillin didn't refuse the 3rd B Squadron's good intentions. The 11th Squad was simply too small, and even if they were to face an accident, the 3rd B Squadron could still lend them a hand. Out of the entire Vanguard, only the 3rd B Squadron had the best relationship with the 11th Squad. 3 days later, Sillin received a summon from Ji Feng. It was a summon for the entire Vanguard, and all 11 squads were to depart immediately after receiving this order. The well-prepared group didn't panic. In fact, Carrie and the others were looking forward to it very much. Before they left, Sillin tried to persuade Mo Hung to stay behind again. The old man was old, and he might not be able to take care of everything when the time came. However, Mo Hung was very persistent about this. Look, even Dias's little boy is coming with us. What's there for an old man like me to be afraid of? Plus, I've already written my last will, so I won't blame you even if something happens. My son knows me very well. He knows me very well. Like hell he knows. Sillin wanted nothing more than to knock Mo Hung out and toss him into the base. Sir Mo couldn't even come up with an excuse that involved last will. This made Sillin feel very helpless. In the end, Mo Hung was surrounded by 4 robots and boarded the starship. Rufia promised Sillin that it would protect Sir Mo, but Sillin didn't have much faith in its promise. In fact, he didn't even know Rufia as well as Moon. Before they left for the A Squadron, Sillin called you over and told him to keep an eye on their surroundings while they were protecting Mo Hung. There was a chance that someone might sneak into their base. Sneak into Little 11? Moon asked with a tilt of his head. The enemy must have a powerful background to be able to sneak into the base without Little 11 noticing. That's why I want you 4 to be careful. Alright, I understand. I'll protect Grandpa Mo, with Moon and the others around. Even if they couldn't pinpoint the enemy's exact location, they would definitely notice them if they snuck into the base. What about you? Aren't you, Cheto and Whis inside the starship? Moon asked. I don't know what's going to happen when the time comes. I may have to go out, and Cheto and Whis may have their own opponents. Therefore, I'll leave Little 11 to you 4. The light bar on Moon's face flashed for a moment before he said, and I understand. Little Bai is here too. Moon was a very smart robot, and he was able to analyze a lot of things from Sillin's words. Although Moon often looked unreliable, he was the real leader of the group. Even the conceited Rufia and the uncommunicative Zoel viewed Moon as their leader under certain circumstances. The starship passed through an asteroid belt and a couple of non-habitable planets. It was then that they saw other B squadrons heading toward the base. However, it wasn't the 3rd B Squadron, it was the 2nd B Squadron. Since they weren't familiar with each other, they simply greeted each other and went their separate ways. There were a lot of people in the 2nd B Squadron who mocked the 11th Squad because the 11th Squad was just a small starship that couldn't even compare to a child starship of the 2nd B Squadron. Even a small squadron of the 2nd B Squadron was much larger than the 11th degrees. The B Squadrons that were heading toward the A Squadron's base were all attached to motherships, and some of them were even accompanied by some corvettes or space planes. It was a grand sight to behold. Therefore, the 11th Squad looked incredibly weak at first glance. The 11th Squads didn't enter the A Squadron's base directly. In fact, they didn't even approach it. Instead, they stayed close to the planet and the smaller planets around it. The 3rd B Squadron went straight to the 11th Squad's base after they arrived. In the eyes of the other B Squadrons, the 3rd B Squadron was playing the role of babysitter. By the time all 11 B Squadrons had arrived, the A Squadron's fleet was ready to depart. There were 3 A Squadron starships, and all of them were large composite starships. The spaceplanes and fighters that were scattered around the spaceport flew into the A Squadron after the 3 large composite starships left the spaceport. Awo, it's time to depart. Carrie cheered. Yes, the 11B squadrons were only here for one meeting. They would follow the A squadron starships to the negotiation site. And it was very likely that they would fight there. Emohung clicked his tongue in wonder as he stared at the A squadron's 3 starships on the screen. These 3 starships are big enough to carry all 11 of your squadrons. The A squadron's starships sure look impressive. They're all free starships, but they give off a different vibe, Diaz said. The A squadron's 3 composite starships were about the same size as the B squadrons, but they gave off a very special vibe. It was easy to tell who belonged to the A squadron and who belonged to the B squadrons at first glance. That's why those people can only be part of the B squadrons. That being said, if our squadron's free starships are bigger, there's no way we'll lose to the A squadron starships. Yudi was confident in this. Where's Sillin? Emohung asked when he didn't see Sillin. He saw Sillin a moment ago, but he was gone in the blink of an eye. Shouldn't he be in the command room, ready to give orders at a moment's notice? I received a transfer just now, Yudi explained. The transmissions were too secret, and Sillin normally didn't use them in the command room. Instead, he used them in his own lounge. Cheto and the gray cat were there, so they wouldn't be eavesdropped. Sillin was indeed on the receiving end of a call, but it wasn't the one Yudi mentioned. It was Somba Leruo who was on the receiving end of the call. It was to remind Sillin to pay attention to the situation in the squad, especially the new members. And now, it was Uncle Ian who was on the receiving end of the call. Mist has arrived. Keep an eye out for them. Oh right, it's still the same thing. If you need help, you can come to us directly. We're here as well. What are you here for? Are you here to watch the show? Sillin asked. I'm not that bored. I'm just here to take out a few people I don't like. Don't worry, they're not from Vanguard. I don't like Ji Feng either, but since he's that monster Nabila's target, I won't interfere. Wuxia said. Nabila was the current leader of Mist. Sillin was very impressed by Mist and no pardon. Uncle Ian had told him that they had arrived at the coordinates, so he was sure that both the Vanguard and the Navigator were feeling nervous. Of course, this was only limited to those who knew about this information. Those who didn't probably wouldn't know that these 2 famous assassin organizations in the League of Stars were here, would they? A dozen or so large-sized composite ships, and almost 100 medium-sized ships and child ships. This kind of lineup could be considered huge. Although it wasn't all of Vanguard's strength, it was still shocking enough. Other than the B squadrons who were carrying out missions, and those who were stationed at the base, the rest of the B squadrons were gathered here. A portion of the A squadron was stationed at the main camp at Sector K, and the rest were stationed at the subbase at Sector Z. However, half of the higher-ups were here, including Somba Leruo and Bart. The people on Mist's assassination list were among them. The target of the negotiation was an area outside of Vanguard and Navigator's territory. It was a free zone, and there was a rank B habitable planet here. It used to belong to the military, but after the League of Stars' military split up, there was no one to manage it. This time, the planet was forcefully requisitioned because of the incident involving the 2 hunter regiments. The military didn't say anything when they learned about it. It was just a normal rank B habitable planet anyway, so they could do whatever they wanted. Look, it's Navigator's men, Carrie said excitedly as he looked at the scene on the screen. On the screen, on the other side of the planet, a fleet about the same size as Vanguard's was parked in a formation. They had just arrived not too long ago. After all the motherships had come to a stop, the composite mothership began to split apart. The child ships and accompanying starships, spaceplanes and fighters separated from the mothership. In an instant, the fleet's range expanded several times, and it was now densely packed with starships, spaceplanes and fighters. If one were to look at it from a further angle, they would see the following image. 2 fleets were spread out on both sides of a not-so-big planet. They looked like a pair of half-spread wings that sandwiched the planet in the middle. The 11th Squad starships were not eye-catching at the periphery of Vanguard's wing. They were surrounded by the 3rd B Squadron's child ships and some large spaceplanes, warships, and space fighters. The 11th Squad starships did not stand out at all. Don't we need to go out? Carrie adjusted his equipment and asked Sillin. Xiaoshang and the others were also looking at Sillin expectantly, but Sillin didn't agree. Now wasn't the time yet. The 11th Squadron's starships weren't all that eye-catching, but the 11th Squadron's fighter jets were. It wasn't that the fighter jets were flashy, but rather that they were custom-made fighter jets with extremely high performance. Coupled with the fact that Xiaoshang and the others couldn't hold themselves back, the 11th Squadron's fighter jets would be exposed before the battle even began. It was the time to gauge each other's strength before the battle began, so Sillin wasn't going to let Carrie and the others go out just yet. After Jifeng left an order for the squadron leaders, one of the A Squadron starships flew toward the planet. The first batch of Vanguard's Vanguard troops were already waiting for them there, and Navigator's situation was the same. The B Squadron, on the other hand, stayed at the periphery of the planet and spread out in a certain formation. This way they wouldn't be able to hurt their own people easily even if a fight broke out. Chapter 387. The negotiations on the planet had already begun, and the people on the B squadrons could only see the general situation outside the planet through the transmissions. They couldn't know the specifics of the negotiations, and they would choose their next course of action based on the signal sent by the A squadron. Although they couldn't see the negotiations happening on the planet, the tension radiating from the planet had infected everyone around it. The large images on both sides of the planet showed the factions of both sides, but there wasn't even a band music playing right now. The starships were all quiet, and the only thing that added a hint of liveliness to the solemn atmosphere was the fighter jets flying around outside. According to Sillin's knowledge, there were 3 vice commanders in the entire Vanguard's upper echelon. Vice Commander Soloist stayed at Sector K's headquarters, Vice Commander Kongling stayed at Sector Z's branch base, and Stanley was the only one who came with Jifeng. This meant that as the only vice commander who came with Jifeng, there was a high chance that Stanley was on the Fog's assassination list. Sillin stared at the name list in his hand and pondered. He felt that there were a lot of things that Jifeng didn't explain to him clearly, and these secrets would probably be exposed after this war. Just as Sillin was thinking about some of the things he didn't understand, the communicator in his hand suddenly flashed. It didn't have a fixed frequency, and it was like a secret signal that told Sillin who the caller was. Sillin raised his hand and motioned for the others to continue paying attention to the A Squadron's movements. Then he returned to his own lounge. "What's wrong this time?" Sillin looked at Wuxia on the hologram and asked. "I'm just checking to see how your preparations are going." Uncle Ian was still holding a box of ice cream and eating leisurely. He picked a mouthful for himself and another mouthful for the little animal nestled in his arms. "If there's nothing important, I'm going to disconnect." "Don't be hasty. You youngsters just can't keep your cool." Wuxia passed the box to the little animal in his arms. It was only the size of 2 fists, but it was able to hold a small bucket of ice cream so easily. It was impossible for a normal animal to do so. "I just wanted to remind you this time. Don't get angry if something happens later. Such as your starship changing owners." I'm guessing. With Jifeng's personality, if he sensed that the negotiations weren't going well and the war was about to escalate, he definitely wouldn't put all his hopes on you. "Are you talking about the person in our team who's on the Mist's hit list?" "Correct. Actually, I think the people from Mist must have leaked some information to Tamir. Tamir wouldn't let go of this opportunity to attack Jifeng." The tamer that Wuxia was talking about was the current leader of the Navigators. He was one of the 6 stars of Hunter, just like Jifeng. Why is that person so important? Is he related to Captain Jifeng? Hidden Wuxia didn't seem to like Jifeng, but when he heard Sillin's question, he didn't keep quiet like before. Instead, he said, "They are related, but it's not just because of their relationship. Jifeng has a lot of sons, and a few of his grandsons are about the same age as you. However, those people are very low-key, and only a few of them are known to the public. Even if a few of them are killed because of the war, he wouldn't care. However, this one is different." When he said this, Hidden Wuxia's eyes flashed with obvious mockery. From Hidden Wuxia's words, Sillin guessed that one of the 5 newcomers must be Jifeng's descendant. Since Hidden Wuxia said it was his son, then Phoebe and Kong Lujiao were eliminated. The only choices were Mao, Mogaz, and Pango. However, Sillin had a lot of questions. First, Sillin had come into contact with all of them before. He had fought with them, but he hadn't learned any genetic information from them. Second, what was so special about Ji Feng's son? Was he worth Ji Feng, Song Baleruo, and the other higher-ups' nervousness? You want to know? Hidden Wuxia crossed his legs and said smugly, You want to know? Tell me. Of course. Hidden Wuxia adjusted his sitting posture and stroked his short beard. You know Olillo, right? Have you heard of the spell that represents evolution in Olillo? Olillo again? It seems that this person is related to the spell. Sillin thought about everything he knew about Olillo. If he was connected to the incantation, then that person must possess some kind of ability. What else? Sillin looked at Hidden Wuxia. Uncle Yin's eyes twitched. He only said this to see Sillin's reaction. But Sillin's reaction was only a little surprised when he first heard it. He was so calm that Hidden Wuxia wanted to slap him. It was obvious that Sillin didn't have much ambition for Olillo. Originally, he wanted to persuade Sillin to create some trouble for Ji Feng, but he didn't expect it to have such an effect. However, Uncle Yin was very satisfied with the result. Other than that, there's nothing else. Good luck to you. Oh right, I'll mourn for your starship. With that, Hidden Wuxia ended the communication. Sillin sat in his room and thought about what Hidden Wuxia said. He felt that these people were all mysterious. Also, Wuxia seemed to be communicating with him more frequently. What was he after? While he was thinking, Sillin's shoulder sank. Huimao ran over and squatted on Sillin's shoulder. He raised his foot and tapped Sillin's face. Sillin, can I change my form and go out to fight later? Huimao's eyes lit up. This guy was looking forward to the upcoming battle. Sillin swatted Huimao's paw away. You didn't even clean up the fish biscuits after scooping them up. It smells like fish. As he spoke, Sillin suddenly paused. He looked at Huimao and lowered his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Whis, do you think you're the only cyborg in the entire League of Stars? Sillin asked. Huh. Huimao, who was licking his paw, was puzzled. Didn't you guys say that the stable state of cyborgs basically doesn't exist? If I hadn't eaten that unknown thing, I wouldn't have been able to transform so smoothly. What if there's another cyborg that's as stable as you and can transform smoothly? Huimao narrowed his eyes and said with a deep look. If it's not a friend, then it's an enemy. If it's an enemy, I'll kill it. Sillin. Sillin, is there really such a thing? I don't know. I just thought of asking. Sillin wasn't sure if the one on Wuxia's side was the same as Huimao's. Although the probability was very small in Sillin's eyes, the remaining probability couldn't be ignored. However, if it really was that small probability, Sillin couldn't imagine how Huimao would react when faced with a fellow that looked like a mouse. He would probably choose to eat it. What a headache. Sillin rubbed his forehead. What's wrong? Huimao asked. Nothing, I'm just thinking too much. Oh, don't think too much. You'll turn into an idiot, Huimao said in a serious tone. Sillin. When Sillin returned to the command room, the A-team had already sent out a warning signal. It seemed that the negotiations weren't going well. They had only talked for a short while, and they were already starting to get restless. Should we get ready? Carrie shook his arms. There was a thruster at the joints of his arms and legs. There was also a retractable device on his back. Shimu had decided to add a few pieces of equipment to Merciless' suit of armor. This way, they wouldn't have to rely on any other tools to fly in space. Moreover, the suit of armor was very sensitive. The faster a member's reflexes were, the better they would be able to utilize the suit of armor. Let's get ready. Before Sillin could finish his sentence, he received a call from the A-team starship. After accepting the call, an image appeared on the screen. To everyone's surprise, it was one of the 3 vice commanders, and the only vice commander who had come to this meeting, Stanley. Stanley looked very serious. After the communication was connected, he went straight to the point. I need the leadership of your starship. I'll take over later. While Stanley was speaking seriously on the light screen, Whis had already left a few claw marks on the table beside him. Give up the starship? Why the hell? Are they trying to steal my territory? Do these people have a death wish or something? Cheto poked Huimao, who was gradually losing control of his emotions. He shook his head and motioned for him to calm down. Sillin took out another spaceplane. This was the one Shikai and the others had built through practice. Sillin had Dias's youngest son, Emohung, Shikai, and Shimu board it. Part of Shikai's mech army was also inside. Once the battle began, and the spaceplane was safely away, Sillin wouldn't have to worry about their safety. Sillin had a private conversation with Shikai and Shimu, but no one knew what it was about. After the spaceplane left, Sillin arranged for the rest of the B squadrons to return to the spaceplane. There was another modified spaceplane on the starship, so Sillin had the rest of the B squadrons board it, and the rest of the fighters move inside as well. 11th, keep an eye on this place. Don't let anyone go to the places I told you about, Sillin said. All right. 11th sounded a little sad. Don't worry, we'll be back soon. We haven't abandoned you. Sillin turned around and saw Huimao dragging his locker into the spaceplane. Behind him, Cheto was even helping him carry a few things like his furry cat nest. We're just leaving for a while. We're not moving. No, I don't trust them. Huimao dragged his precious locker into the spaceplane without looking back. Seeing Huimao's reaction, Shueqiu and the others also started moving their stuff. They were afraid that their treasures would be taken away. Stanley was the one who was going to take over the starship when he said he was going to send someone to take over. He didn't think that the vice commander would come to take over the starship himself instead of helping Ji Feng. Stanley didn't pay attention to the others' movements. He only looked at the 5 Mogaz's group of 5 when he arrived. After giving Sillin a nod, he walked toward the command center with his men. After that, Sillin made a gesture in the air and said, "We're leaving now. Keep an eye on this place." 11th. After Sillin boarded the spaceplane took off and left the starship. For the first time in their lives, the 11th squad members felt bitter inside. It was as if someone had taken over their own home. Carrie didn't know why the A squad was doing this, but he knew a thing or two about a hunter's habits. For example, they wouldn't treat things that didn't belong to them as precious. Back when they were on the 11th squad starship, they made sure not to damage the walls around them even when they were fighting against each other. But would these people do the same? Would they take care not to shoot at the wall, kick the chair, or kick the table? The more Carrie thought about it, the more upset he felt. He decided to vent his pent-up anger and dissatisfaction on the enemies in the upcoming battle. Sillin told them that he would take back control of the starship, so they didn't retaliate. Otherwise, Carrie wouldn't be afraid of them even if they were the A squad members. On Stanley's side, after the A-team took over this small starship, they looked down on it at first, but gradually, they discovered some special things on this starship. For example, many places could not be accessed at all, and some places had access control. Stanley could not command the access control system, and the person who cracked the code could not do anything about it either. When someone threatened to shoot down the door, Phoebe sent him flying with a whip. The 5 of them wouldn't allow that to happen. Isn't it just a stupid starship? Do you really need to protect it so well? The person who was sent flying waddled over to them. Phoebe and the others didn't say anything. Stanley also told his men to be more careful. He was clearly going to accommodate the 5 of them. Vice Captain, there are many places on this starship that are sealed off. The lounges, workshops, and so on are all locked up, one of them said. I advise you not to barge in recklessly. Mogaz leaned against the wall and said to the group of people who were looking left and right. What if I barge in? The person asked. This time Mogaz didn't answer. Instead, a childish voice answered. Then I won't hold back. On the other hand, Sillin was chatting with his men on the spaceplane. He told them about the new operation plan and some emergency measures. Sillin only ended the call after he received repeated assurances that they would execute the plan according to Sillin's instructions. What are those people trying to do, Sillin? Huimao was lying listlessly on its side, fiddling with a ball-shaped nut in front of it. It was worried about Sigma's indoor orchard on the starship. It was worried that the place it had rubbed its scent on would be destroyed by someone. That was why it couldn't afford to give up territory. Sillin stroked Huimao's fur. You'll know when the time comes. What if they destroy the starship? What about Little 11? What about Sigma's indoor orchard, your workshop, and my turf? The last sentence was the main point. Then we'll teach them a lesson as well. When the time comes, many people might enter our starship. Other than the people from Vanguard, there are also people from Navigator and others. No matter who they are, we'll teach them a lesson together. Huimao stood up and shook his fur. Yeah, we'll teach them a lesson together. We need to teach them a lesson. Of course. Beep, beep, beep. 3 alarms sounded, indicating the start of the battle. After these 3 alarms, an explosion occurred in a place on the planet, and a huge mushroom cloud rose. That was the place where the negotiations were taking place. Chapter 388. The explosion on the planet signified the official start of this inevitable battle. The A Squadron had their own arrangements, and the squads had their own responsibilities. The A Squadron's formation had changed, and the B Squadron was not allowed to go to that area as they pleased. If they did, they might ruin the A Squadron's formation and plan, and they might even be mistaken for an enemy and be killed. If that happened, they could only blame it on their own luck if they were accidentally killed. Every B Squadron had their own squad leaders. Although the 3rd B Squadron wanted to protect the 11th Squad, it was incredibly difficult to locate Silin's spaceship in a battlefield full of small spaceplanes and all kinds of space fighters. Moreover, the 3rd B Squadron had just received an order to protect the 11th Squad's starship. Other than the squad leader and a few people, no one in the 3rd B Squadron knew that the 11th Squad's starship had been replaced. They naturally carried out the order without any questions. What they didn't know, however, was that the person they wanted to help had been forced out of that small starship. Silin had spoken to the 3rd B Squadron's squad leader and told him to ignore them and protect the 11th Squad's starship. Since Silin had said so, the 3rd B Squadron's squad leader no longer insisted. The 3rd B Squadron had to pay attention to their own squad's movements, the enemy's movements, and the A Squadron's new orders so that they could respond at the first sign of trouble. They couldn't even take care of themselves right now. The large starships and spacecrafts had already raised their energy shields the moment the alarm went off. The dark red energy shields told the people piloting the spacecrafts that the energy shields were currently activated. Don't collide with them, or you'll be digging your own grave. Ah, isn't that energy shield made from the energy ore we discovered before? Huimao patted Silin excitedly after he saw the image on the screen. Yes, that's the one. The dark red energy shields on Vanguard starships and spaceplanes were made from the energy ore Silin discovered back when he was still in the 6th Division. After that, the mining of the energy ore on that planet was directly handed over to the A Squadron, and the 6th Squadron's ranking in the Vanguard fleet soared. However, that was all in the past. The credit belonged to the 6th Division, not the 11th Squad. How infuriating. Huimao was now full of resentment. When it thought about how the fruits of its hard work had all gone to others and how little it had gained, it was very angry, very, very angry. The result of Huimao's anger was that he had scratched a couple of holes in the metal table beside him, and that was after Cheto had comforted him. Inside the aircraft, Yudi sat in the main command seat and gave commands. A team of robots stayed on the aircraft to assist in piloting, so the others could free up their hands to do other things. Sharo and Tico, Yudos and Tang Qiuqiu, Dias and his wife, Shusag and Tesoro, Carrie and Chifeng, and Xiaoshang and Badao were all flying out to meet the navigators. Shusag had always thought that the 11th Squad had some influence even though it was a little small in number. Now however, Shusag and his son were in the same fighter. As they watched the dense array of spaceships, starships, and fighters surrounding the planet, Shusag finally understood why the A Squadron's members reacted the way they did when they arrived at the 11th Squadron starship for the handover of command. They didn't care. Yes, the 11th Squad's dozen or so people were practically negligible when compared to the entire Vanguard. Back on the starship, although the 11th Squadron starship was small, it was still a starship. It was still different from other spaceships. Even if it didn't have much of a presence, it still had a presence. But now? The spaceplane Sillin was on right now was hidden in this enormous battlefield. No one would know that it was actually a flying tool used by a squad leader of one of the 4 great squadrons on the main battlefield. Compared to the other 10 squadrons, Sillin's current situation could only be described as shabby. Shusag recalled that the people who had followed Stanley to the 11th Squad starship might have looked at Sillin with sympathy and mockery. Fighter jets flashed by, flames from explosions, all kinds of sound waves, electromagnetic interference, energy-absorbing weapons, and cannons bombarded and counterattacked one after another. White cold beam cryogenic cannons and scorching particle cannons intersected in this seemingly chaotic battlefield. Fighter aircrafts were constantly being destroyed, and smaller aircrafts were also being destroyed. Some were from Vanguard's side, and some were from Navigator's side. The surrounding space environment was already filled with debris of various sizes. Aircraft that had been hovering in front of Shusag a moment ago were blown to smithereens in the next. Not even a groan could be heard from them. Life and death were decided in the blink of an eye. Sillin thinks of a phrase he had read in Komunidin's diary. A battlefield that burns with one's life. The atmosphere of the battlefield was always able to make the hunters immerse themselves in it. Even the usually timid hunters would ignore the fear in their hearts at this moment, and rush into the battlefield that was filled with sparks and sparks. Sillin stood inside the control room of the spaceplane. There were 8 light screens in front of him, and they were displaying the movements in 6 different directions. The remaining 2 screens were displaying the situation on the planet. A normal person would be dazzled if they had to pay attention to 2 or 3 screens at the same time, but Sillin could easily pay attention to 8 screens at the same time. While paying attention to the activity on the light screen, Sillin told Cheto some information that he needed to record and analyze. Wheeze was the only one who was bored enough to walk around the metal platform and scratch its claws twice. Judging from the frequency at which its whiskers were trembling, Sillin knew that the fellow was very impatient and holding back its anger. Sillin frowned as he stared at the screen. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had overlooked something. After carefully analyzing the images displayed on the screens, Sillin's attention was focused on the debris floating in space that was growing in number. These debris were affecting the fighter aircrafts quite a bit, and it was obvious that many of the aircrafts at the center of the battlefield had slowed down a bit. Sillin zoomed in on one of the screens. There were some things that looked like floating rocks among the debris of various sizes. What on earth are they? Sillin zoomed in on the details on the other 7 screens. Can you analyze these further? Sillin asked Cheto. Cheto stared at the floating pebbles Sillin was pointing at and tried to analyze them. Unfortunately, he couldn't come into direct contact with them, and there were all kinds of disturbances in the battlefield, so his ability to analyze them was limited. I can't. I'm not sure what they are, but they're different from the debris. I sense some special signals, Cheto replied. The communicator in Sillin's hand flashed a few times while he was thinking. Is it invisible, Wuxia? It wasn't a video this time. It was a message, beware of bugs. 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 Sillin immediately connected the communicators on the 6 fighter aircrafts and communicated with them. Be careful not to touch those floating debris. Avoid them as much as you can and don't come into contact with them. Since the outer material of the aircrafts was a little tough, it wasn't a big deal to bump into small debris from time to time. Although they were a little puzzled by Sillin's words, they did as they were told. At worst, they would just slow down a bit. Everyone's speed had decreased quite a bit anyway, so they could take care of themselves as long as they were careful. After all, this wasn't the A Squadron's central battlefield, and the fighter aircrafts at the center of the battlefield were moving around in a hurry. Even if they slowed down, they would still be much faster than the fighter aircrafts at the periphery. This was the difference in technology. Yudos didn't think that he was any weaker than the A Squadron. In fact, he was confident that he could charge into the central battlefield at his original speed, take out a couple of navigators and return safely after that. Originally, Yudos wanted to give it a try, but Sillin had warned them before the battle began, so Yudos gave up on the idea. At worst, he would just try somewhere close to the central battlefield. Sillin's words reached his ears before he could act. What's there to avoid debris? Some of the wreckage was classified as wreckage within the safety line, which was the wreckage and other obstacles that the warship could withstand, according to the warship's functional coefficients and defensive capabilities, etc. Sometimes, avoiding debris on purpose would actually make everyone's hands and feet tied. It didn't take long for everyone to understand why Sillin gave such an order. Carrie accidentally ran into an obstacle while making a sharp turn after avoiding a shot from a navigator. "You've hit a debris," Chiefing said. It hadn't even been 2 minutes since Sillin said that, and Carrie had already run into one, so Chiefing reminded him. "Got it, little friend." Carrie looked at the display on the fighter's instrument. It was just an obstacle within the safety line, and it didn't seem to affect the fighter's functions. Just as he finished thinking this, he realized that the debris was stuck to the fighter. After trying to shake it off a few times, Carrie decided to ignore it. However, very quickly, the fighter's safety system sounded a warning. "What's going on?" Carrie was puzzled. Chiefing followed the system's warning and pulled up the image taken by the external camera. "What's this?" Chiefing was shocked. After Carrie fired and blasted away the enemy fighter, he turned his head to look. Fuck! On the tail of Carrie's fighter, there was something about a meter long stuck there. It looked like the stone debris floating in space, but the problem was that this thing was alive. The originally somewhat bumpy oval thing gradually stretched out, revealing a head and sickle-like claws. The other abdomens were like suction cups sucking tightly on the fuselage, and the liquid that sprayed out of this thing's mouth began to corrode the fuselage. Fortunately, this fighter was made of some special materials, so its resistance was a little stronger. After a long time, only a shallow mark was left on it. At the same time, Carrie discovered that one of the navigator's battleships also had the same thing. The guys over there were not as lucky as Carrie. Their battleship was quickly corroded, and in the space environment, any small hole on a flying tool could be fatal. Although he didn't know what exactly happened on the other side, Carrie only knew that the warship was destroyed by another Vanguard warship not long after it brushed past them unhurriedly. There was no telling if the thing stuck to the fighter plane had been destroyed along with it or not. Carrie quickly contacted Sillin and reported the situation to him. Meanwhile, Sillin was already analyzing the thing. He ordered all 6 fighters to fly to where the spaceplane was. Fortunately, the material used to make the aircrafts were pretty resistant to corrosion, so there was no danger for now. After Sillin had sorted out the information he had on the thing and sent it to the B Squadron commanders, he summoned Cheto and Huimao. "Get ready to leave." Huimao's spirits lifted. "We can finally leave this place." Sillin brought up the star map of this war zone and drew a circle on it. Then he said to Yudi, "Circle around this area. Don't stray too far away." "All right, don't worry." Yudi looked at the area Sillin circled. It was where their starship was located, and the 11th Squad starships were flying around this area all this time. More and more fighter aircrafts were gathering in this area. Some were navigators and some were vanguards. Fuck, electrocution is useless against them. Carrie cursed while staring at the image captured by the external camera on the system screen. Right now, 2 of those strange things were stuck to their spaceplane. He hadn't noticed it at first, but now he realized that there were more and more of them around them. When did these things appear? "I'll go take care of them," Chiefing said. "Don't. We're almost at the place," Sillin said. "You should take care of the 3 enemy fighters first." There were 2 weapon systems on a fighter. One was for the pilot, and the other could be used by the co-pilot. Right now, Chiefing was sitting in the co-pilot seat. Although he didn't really pilot a fighter, he was helping Carrie deal with the enemy fighters. Compared to shooting, Chiefing preferred the most primitive way of combat, hand-to-hand combat, no claw combat. Carrie was worried about leaving Chiefing alone. The little guy wasn't good at space, and it would be terrible if he lost control of his armor and got flung out of the spaceplane. When the fighter finally arrived at the range, Sillin said. Sillin's voice entered Carrie's communicator. "Adjust the pilot speed to medium 3rd gear, and don't attack for half a minute. Cheto and I will help you take care of the things on the spaceplane." Carrie did as Sillin said and started the countdown. Their time limit had always been very strict. Half a minute later, Carrie and Chiefing would enter attack mode again. When Carrie's countdown reached the 13th second, a figure flew toward their fighter. The figure's feet were tightly attached to the fuselage, and one of his hands was pressed against the fuselage to stabilize himself in a triangular formation with his feet. After he stabilized himself, the figure swiftly punched the insect that was spraying corrosive liquid on the fuselage. No sound could be heard, but when Carrie saw the thing's head get punched through, he thought it should have been a crisp crack. Because the thing looked very hard on the outside, the person's fist must be really hard to punch through. Although the insect's head was already dead, its legs were still tightly attached to the fuselage, so Carrie could only pull it off directly. Even after the whole thing was pulled off, the suction cups on its legs were still tightly attached to the fuselage. Carrie felt a chill run down his spine when he saw the strange things that were forcibly torn off the fuselage and the broken limbs. What the hell is this? After the first insect was taken care of, the second one was quickly torn off the fuselage in the same way. By the time Carrie's countdown reached the 13th second, both of them had been taken care of. Thanks, Cheto, Carrie said to the figure flying into the distance. Is that Cheto? Chiefing was puzzled. Who else could it be if not Cheto? That's how Cheto does things. He likes to solve his problems with his bare fists because it's more direct and less troublesome. However, I'm afraid that Cheto is the only one who has such hard fists, Carrie said. Chiefing frowned and scratched his red hair. I still think that person is Sillin. Sillin? Doesn't our captain always use swords and guns? Carrie retorted, but Carrie quickly fell silent. Now that he thought about it, the man's movements were so smooth when he took care of the two strange things. It was so smooth that it didn't look like he was on a spaceship, but a stone bench in a normal environment. It was too natural, too smooth, and he punched a hole through the strange thing's head. No matter how he looked at it, it should be Cheto's doing. Carrie hesitated when he saw Chiefing's determined gaze. Then who was the person who flew past just now? What are you doing, idiot? You're spacing out at a time like this. Xiaoshang's angry curses came from Carrie's communicator. Just now, an enemy navigator had locked onto Carrie's aircraft and almost opened fire while Carrie was spacing out. If Xiaoshang hadn't taken care of the enemy first, Carrie's aircraft would have been hit already. Ahem, I spaced out. Carrie quickly adjusted himself and answered. Is your brain full of shit? How can you get distracted on a battlefield like this? You joined the squad before me. Xiaoshang mocked. Thanks, brother. Carrie came back to his senses and stopped thinking about whether the man was Sillin or Cheto. Carrie knew that their captain had never revealed his true combat strength, but he couldn't help but overlook Sillin's strength. It was because Sillin mostly used swords and guns in front of them. On the other side, Sillin helped Carrie and the others get rid of the bugs stuck to their aircraft after he had taken care of the two bugs on it. How is it, Cheto? Sillin asked. We've sent them the sample analysis data already, Cheto said as he tore a bug off Shisag's body. He had sent the bug analysis and sample analysis to Shikai and the others so that they could analyze it for him. Right now, neither he nor Sillin had the time to do so. Huimao was crouching outside Yudo's aircraft and chewing the bug he had just bitten off. He spat it out after chewing twice. This is disgusting. Chapter 389. Although Sillin didn't know what kind of insects they were, he knew that the person who created them must have put a lot of effort into it. After all, there were very few species that could synthesize a corrosive liquid that could melt away the outer materials of a space fighter and survive on their own. This time, it was obvious that someone had done it on purpose. Not only that, they had disguised the insects so that they looked like floating rocks and made it difficult for others to detect them. It could be said that they had put a lot of thought into this. Was it Wuxia's doing? Or was it the Mist's people who had been quiet all this time? It couldn't be the Navigator's people because a lot of Navigator's people had fallen victim to the same thing. The Mist's people were more likely to be the culprit. There wasn't any big news from the A Squad. Even if the higher-ups of the A Squad had been assassinated, it probably wouldn't reach the A Squad's ears yet. Right now, Sillin didn't want to care about that. Right now, his attention was on the 11th Squad's starship. Ever since he and Cheto left the spaceplane to help take out the insects, Yudi had told Sillin that more and more fighters were gathering at their starship's area. Almost 10 minutes had passed, and the number of people on the other side had increased. Although the starship was still flying, It was like the eye of a storm right now. Wherever it went, there would be a circle of people surrounding it. Some were vanguards, some were navigators. Moreover, Sillin believed that there were definitely people from Mist mixed in with these spaceplanes and fighters. Both sides were in chaos because of the insects, but they quickly came up with a countermeasure to deal with the situation. One of them was the pilot, and the other was the machine gunner to shoot the insects that had latched onto other spaceplanes or spaceplanes. Everyone was helping each other out. Some people noticed Sillin's actions, but they didn't know who Sillin was because he was wearing a suit of armor. All they needed to know was that he was a member of the Vanguard. Moreover, a lot of people who saw Sillin thought that he was sent by the A Squad to help them. This was a kind of habitual thinking, because when it appeared at this time, coupled with Sillin's mobility, it gave people the feeling that he was one of the specially trained elites in the A Squadron. Sillin dealt with the bugs on Carrie's spaceship and watched them adapt quickly. Then he returned to the spaceship that Yudi was piloting. However, he did not enter the spaceship. Instead, he stood in a depression on the side of the spaceship and watched the battlefield. In addition to causing trouble for both sides, the insects were mainly used to attract attention. Perhaps when everyone was paying attention to the insects, some people had already begun their secret operations. Sillin knew that Vanguard's A Squadron had sent out several special operations teams to attack the main starships of navigators, and navigators were clearly prepared. Both sides were in a stalemate. Every second, there was a pincer attack. Every second, there were new warships or spaceships appearing from hyperspace. Both sides wanted to catch each other off guard, but it was obvious that both sides had a deep understanding of each other, so there was not much effect. These are only superficial. In this space battlefield that cannot be seen, who knows how many secret battles are taking place? For example, the high-level officials on the planet who went to negotiate, and the things that were going on inside the 11th Squadron starship. Yudos piloted the spaceship and quickly took out an enemy that was chasing after the spaceship. He did not need Tang Qiuqiu's help to complete a lot of shooting missions. Of course, with Tang Qiuqiu's help, the number of enemy spaceships they took out doubled. Unlike Yudos and Tang Qiuqiu, Qiuqiu was so bored that it almost dozed off. It was very envious of Huimao, who was squatting outside and picking up bugs from time to play with them. Many people who flew past Yudo's spaceship and saw the fat cat calmly squatting on the fuselage of the spaceship could not help but curse. It was not their fault. This was really too unbelievable. Who would have thought that a cat would not have any protection in space and would be playing with bugs on a fighter jet in this battlefield? In fact, Huimao's color was not very eye-catching, but that was based on the premise that the cat was squatting there quietly. The current situation was that the cat was playing with a bug with its claws. The bug that was many times larger than itself was easily played with by the cat. Before the scythe-like claws could cut Huimao, Huimao had already bitten it off. Huimao was not worried about being hit by stray bullets. First, as long as it was not a heavy weapon, it would not be able to injure it. Second, with Yudo's piloting skills, he could nimbly avoid the enemy's attacks. As long as Huimao stayed close to the fuselage, there was no need to worry about being hit. Qiuqiu curled up inside the spaceship and bit its palms. It also wanted to play with it. Whis was playing carelessly when Sillin's message suddenly came through. He told Huimao to return to the spaceship. There was a mission. When it heard Sillin said there was a mission, Huimao immediately shook off the big bug on its claws. It scratched its ears and prepared to leave, but Qiuqiu stopped it. Half a minute later, Huimao contacted Sillin. Sillin, Qiuqiu says it's bored and wants to follow us. Do you agree? Huimao asked. Sillin thinks for a moment and said, bring it along. Qiuqiu was very excited after getting permission. It put on the armor that Shimu had modified for it, and was ejected from the spaceship. Snowball would be fine if it didn't wear any armor. It could jump for a long time without breathing, and it wasn't afraid of the space environment. However, its white fur was too eye-catching, so it could only put on the armor for now. Although there were some propulsion devices on the armor that allowed it to fly in space, Snowball was not familiar with this. It flew crookedly and directly crashed into a navigator fighter, leaving a dent in it. Qiuqiu grabbed onto Huimao's tail to stabilize itself. Even if it couldn't fly, it could still be carried by Huimao and avoid crashing into spaceships or spaceships. Meow, you fatso! Cursed the gray cat whose tail was grabbed by Wheeze. Shueqiu. Shueqiu looked at Huimao's fat body and fell silent. Who asked it to not have wings? Thus, in this chaotic battlefield, a medium-sized fat cat with wings was dragging something unknown behind it. Everyone who saw this scene was amazed. What the hell is that thing? Some navigators tried to capture the unusual duo, but before they could even get close to Wheeze, they were blasted away by 3 light bullets fired from its mouth. I didn't know you had this trick up your sleeve, Shueqiu said to Huimao through the communicator. Of course I did, Huimao said smugly. I've never seen you use it before. Because I like to keep a low profile, Shueqiu. Fine, I'll keep quiet. The spaceship's hatch had already opened for them. After Huimao charged inside, he turned around and left Shueqiu behind. Before Shueqiu could regain his footing, he rolled out of the hatch and into the passage. Both Silin and Cheto had returned, and there was a spaceship parked next to them. It belonged to Shusag and Cheto. Huimao shook his fur and smoothed out the mess Shueqiu had made on his tail. Then he jumped onto Silin's shoulder and asked, "When are we moving out? What are we going to do?" "We're going back to Little 11, Silin said. Just now, Yudi had lost contact with Little 11, and Cheto couldn't contact him either. The entire starship had been cut off from the outside world. What happened to Little 11? Huimao asked. It's not necessarily because of Little 11. Maybe someone entered the starship and cut off its communication with the outside world somehow. We can't contact the people on the starship, and the people on the starship can't send a message to the outside world, Cheto explained. We should be able to contact Little 11 after we get to the starship. Right now, our mission is to return to the starship, Silin explained to Huimao and Shusag. What about Carrie and the others? Shusag asked. They'll fly their spaceships to the starship and provide cover for us. Yudi ordered the spaceship to approach the starship. There were a lot of navigators around the area. Not even the 3rd B Squadron could spare much energy to help the 11th Squad's starship. Moreover, the starship's energy shield had been deactivated for a while now. Many of the corvettes that were protecting the starship had been left behind. AA Squadron's Special Ops Squad was operating at the Central Battle Zone, and an elite squad was protecting the starship from the navigator's spaceships and spaceships. The elite squad had been following the starship closely, so they hadn't been left behind. The 11th Squad's energy shield had been deactivated, so there was no way they were running out of energy. After the spaceship approached the starship, it sped up and flew toward it. Vanguard didn't attack the spaceship after noticing that it was one of their own. Although they weren't too happy about the spaceship's approach, they didn't open fire. Cheto decrypted the hatch at the bottom of the starship, Silin said. He still couldn't contact Little 11 right now, and since he couldn't open the cabin door himself, Cheto would have to do it for him. In addition to the hatches on the surface, there were also some secret hatches that outsiders did not know about. Done. Cheto was done unlocking the hatch, and a small passage was opened. Good luck, Yudi said. He wouldn't go in with Silin and the others. Tesoro was inside the spaceship as well, and they were far weaker than Silin and the others. They would only be a burden if they went with him. Silin gestured for them to move, and the hatch at the top of the spaceship opened. The armored Silin and the others quickly flew toward the secret hatch. This time, Huimao didn't let Shueqiu grab its tail. It hated having its tail grabbed the most. If it wasn't Shueqiu, it would have bitten anyone it didn't know, even if they were from Vanguard. This time, Cheto was the one who dragged Shueqiu into the secret hatch. Silin told him to train it more, or he wouldn't bring it along for the next space operation. Shueqiu promised repeatedly. It didn't want to sleep in a spaceship out of boredom again. Yudi drove the spaceplane away after Silin and the others had safely entered the secret entrance. However, he still followed them from the surrounding area, paying attention to the situation and cooperating with the elite squad to fight against the navigator. From the moment Yudi flew the spaceship to the moment Silin and the others entered the starship's secret hatch, to the moment Yudi flew the spaceship away from the starship, everything happened in less than 5 seconds. It looked like the spaceship had just brushed past the starship. Sillin and the others had moved very quickly, and there was an object on the spaceship to hide their movements. After entering the secret hatch, Cheto tried to contact Little 11, but he couldn't. It was as if something was stopping him from doing so. What do we do? Cheto asked. Take over control of Little 11. Before leaving, Sillin had told Little 11 that if anyone tried to interfere with the starship's management system and couldn't put up a fight, then everything should stop. Therefore, when Sillin discovered that the passageway and the rest of the starship was completely dark, he knew that Little 11 had shut down most of its internal functions. The only thing it could do was maintain flight, and it was piloted by someone else. Right now it was in a dormant state because it couldn't control it anymore. The people outside couldn't control the starship through it, and they couldn't activate the starship's lighting system either. The starship was designed with a lot of unexpected situations in mind. Later on, when Little 11 was implanted with a super AI, they also made a couple of safety measures. This included the current situation. Other than Little 11, the starship had other management channels. It was just that they weren't known to outsiders. Moreover, even if a few professionals were to study the starship's management channels, it would be extremely difficult to gain control of them. This was because the management rights required a specific machine language, and a specific machine language at that. They waited for Cheto to regain control of the starship. Selim closed his eyes and sensed the situation around him. Although his surroundings were pitch black, he could still sense the changes in every detail in the surrounding area through the darkness. Cheto's management rights were very successful, and he didn't cause any disturbances. No one else on the starship would know that the management rights had changed hands. Sillin could feel Huemao's claws stretching out uncontrollably from his shoulder. He knew that the bastard was very angry right now, but he had to endure it for the sake of the operation. It was hard on him. Although the starship was still in darkness, Sillin didn't ask Cheto to turn on the illumination system. He didn't ask him to change the starship's current condition, but with their abilities, they could see that there were many places inside the starship that were damaged to varying degrees. There were bullet holes in the walls of the passage not far away, and those with keen noses could smell the faint scent of blood, not to mention Huemao's night vision. Right now, he wanted nothing more than to chew up every bastard who dared to mess around in his territory, grind them to bits and spit them out. There's no one within 100 meters of us, Cheto said. The starship was equipped with built-in surveillance cameras. The storage area was relatively hidden, and it was very difficult to detect when it was turned on. What's the general situation right now? Cheto projected an image from his eyes. It was a hologram of the starship's current structure, and it showed the surveillance targets inside the starship. From the image, they could see that there were more people gathered at the shooting field. There were more than 20 people inside the training field, and a group of people outside the training field. They're trying to open the training field's door, Cheto said. He could sense that the training field's door was being damaged, and it wouldn't be long before it was removed. Those people outside are probably navigators' men, Cheto said. Sillin, didn't you say that there might be Mist's men as well? Shusag asked in puzzlement. The Mist's men won't be captured by the surveillance cameras. They're definitely here. Huimao interrupted Sillin the second he was done. Yes, they're here. I can smell their disgusting scent already. We can't let them get away this time. Sillin walked a couple of steps toward the passage, and crouched down at a spot on the floor. He wiped the liquid off the floor with his hand. I remember this guy. Huimao said fiercely. I remember him too. Sillin wiped the liquid off his hand and stepped back. Then he said to Shusag and Shuechyo, there are some liquids inside the starship that carry a kind of hard-to-detect smell. When they stick to a person's body, they'll follow the person's movements and mark their location like a signal. Then shouldn't we be careful later? Shusag frowned. The darkness here was already a hindrance to begin with. Not only would it restrict their movements while concealing themselves, but it would also be incredibly difficult if they had to pay attention to the signal flare that he couldn't smell at all. He wasn't like that cat who could smell all kinds of hidden scents. No, you don't have to pay attention to them. Sillin took out a spray bottle. Spray this on yourself. Shusag took it and sprayed it. He sniffed it hard but couldn't smell anything. Before we left, I had Little 11 coat most of the starship with a scent membrane. Normal people wouldn't be able to detect it, but people who are sensitive to smell would be able to pick it up. Therefore, the scent film Sillin had Little 11 apply after they left could now serve as a form of protection. Even if they accidentally stepped on the liquid that resembled a signal flare, it would still be able to cover their tracks to a certain extent. The armor has an automatic purification function, and this camouflage spray will make it easier to move around. Shusag nodded in realization. He had heard of similar things back when he was in the Mist Bodhisattva army, but he had never experienced it himself. It seemed like he still had a lot to learn. If Sillin hadn't told him about it, he would have become an idiot who thought he was a moving target in the eyes of others. After they were done with the spray, Sillin assigned a few tasks to each of them. They would work separately, and Cheto would be able to know everyone's location and progress through the starship system. Sillin and Shusag would go one way, and Cheto and Shuechiu would go the other way. Cheto would be able to guide Shuechiu. While Sillin and Shusag were approaching the training field, a couple of injured people were tending to their wounds while the others were spread out to protect Mogaz and the others. "Boss, the door won't hold for much longer. They'll be here in about a minute," said a member who had come with Stanley. Stanley waved his hand to show that he understood. The atmosphere in the training field was a little heavy. Of the 30 or so people who had come here, only 20 were left. Including Mogaz and the others, there were only 25 of them left. The navigators and the Mist's assassins were still waiting outside. More than half of their dead members were killed by the Mist's assassins, so Stanley wasn't worried about the navigators breaking down the door. He was worried about the assassins who were hiding somewhere. In fact, he didn't even know how many people the Mist had sent. Mogaz and the others also seized the opportunity to rest. They knew that they were going to fight a tough battle soon. Among the 5, Mogaz, Phoebe, Konglujia, and Mao sat in 4 different directions, protecting Pangu. Pangu sat there quietly. No one knew what he was thinking. It was as if he couldn't sense the heavy atmosphere in the hall. He just sat there quietly and casually. However, Pangu's casualness sent a chill down Stanley's spine. Sometimes, a person without killing intent could have a devil living inside them. It was just that the devil hadn't shown its horns yet. Chapter 390. There were many ways to get to the training ground from the secret entrance, so Sillin and the others split into 2 groups and headed in that direction. Even though it was pitch black, they could still see everything clearly with the visual aids on their armors. Moreover, this was their starship, so Sillin and Shusag were all too familiar with the routes here. Sillin and Shusag were walking along one of the side paths. Normally, no one would pass through this path, and judging from the scent and the traces they left behind, none of the navigators or the A Squadron who had taken over this place had passed through this path. The A Fleet and the navigators didn't pass through here, but that didn't mean the others didn't. Perched on Sillin's shoulder, Huimao sniffed and sneezed in disgust. "That smells so bad." Shusag didn't say anything. Fine, he still didn't smell anything. As they continued forward, Huimao began to move his claws. Sillin knew that something was getting closer and closer. Whoosh! Whis jumped out from Sillin's shoulder and pressed down on an object that was slithering past the passageway with its paw. Then it stomped down hard, and the object turned into a sticky puddle of water with a pop. Before Huimao could do anything, Shusag had already seen what it was. It looked like a rat, but it didn't have the fur of a rat. Instead, it was covered in a layer of metal-like armor. It didn't reflect any light in the dark, but it was obvious that the armor was tough. Its limbs were thick and strong, and they were far from the thin claws of a normal rat. Its claws were sharp enough to leave a mark on the metal walls of the tunnel, and when Whis pinned it to the ground, it opened its mouth to reveal its fangs. But before it could make a sound, Huimao stomped it to death. The thing that died under Wheez's claws gradually turned into a puddle of watery stains. However, it was a little sticky, and its sturdy outer armor and sharp claws had melted with its death. It looked a little sticky. Shusag didn't know what it was, but it was the liquid that Sillin had told them about. What a strange creature. As soon as Shusag was done sighing, he noticed that there were other similar creatures heading their way. He was about to make a move, but Sillin stopped him. Let us take care of this first. Pay attention to your surroundings. I'm afraid that someone will be coming soon. Sillin still remembered the man who brushed past him back in prison. Even if the man had disguised himself well at the time, Sillin could still see the same emotions flashing in his eyes as the crimson eyes of the things Whis was stepping on. Crazy, cruel, bloodthirsty. Huimao was still moving at a speed that did not match its body size at all, trampling the mouse-like things that surrounded it into mucus. Shusag watched in amazement as Huimao stomped them to death. You can never judge a cat by its appearance. Sillin, who had been standing there quietly all this time, gestured at Shusag. Shusag immediately went on alert. Sillin was telling him that someone was coming over, but he didn't notice it. At least when he noticed it, he was just a little later than Sillin. As expected of an assassin, his concealment was indeed very good. If it weren't for Sillin's reminder, Shusag would have been in a more passive position. The other party also knew that Sillin had sensed his approach, so he did not continue to hide. In response, a large number of rat-like creatures swarmed in from both the front and back of the tunnel. Some of them were larger and looked more difficult to deal with. Sillin put his hand behind his back and signaled to Shusag. Sillin would deal with the person who came over, while Shusag would deal with the rats. Shusag's specialized claws were already extended, and he took a few steps back to maintain a certain distance from Sillin. This way, he could rush over to help out in the event of an emergency, look out for each other, and avoid getting hurt by accident. That way he wouldn't restrict Sillin's movements. Sillin didn't pay attention to the rats swarming toward him. He had Huimao to help him deal with the rats in front of him, and Shusag to guard him from behind. Right now, he was focused on the person who was slowly making his way toward him. The figure grew closer and closer. After moving a little closer, it stopped 50 meters away from Sillin. It seemed to be hesitating whether to come over or not. The figure didn't move, and neither did Sillin. Both sides seemed to be waiting for the other to make the first move. More and more rats appeared, and almost half of the narrow path ahead was blocked. Huimao extended his claws like a meat grinder and ground them into slime. The ground was already covered in the disgusting slime. Huimao shook the slime off his hind legs in disgust. He could have just opened his mouth and swallowed the slime, but Huimao found it too disgusting and unpalatable, so he chose to use his claws instead. Sillin didn't seem to care about what was happening in front of him. He just stood there quietly as if he didn't see it. Suddenly, Sillin's figure flashed, and it was as if he had vanished from where he was standing. A hand stretched out from the layer of mucus where he had been standing. The hand had long fingernails, and the shape of the fingernails was similar to the claws of those mice. The outstretched hand didn't manage to grab Sillin. Instead, before it could retract, it was cut off by Sillin's slender sword. All of this happened in an instant. The severed arm melted into slime. However, this slime was different from the transparent slime from before. The slime from the arm was blood red. The man was injured. The figure that stayed 50 meters away began to melt and disappear from the head. That was not the real body of the man. The real body had been lurking among the rats. The Roten was very angry. He didn't expect his arm to be cut off so quickly. Sillin's movement was too fast, and it was neither too early nor too late. Sillin dodged the attack just before the Roten's outstretched hand could grab it. The Roten now understood that Sillin was actually standing there to lure him into making a move, and to cut him when he made his move. From the looks of it, Sillin had the ability to dodge before he even revealed his hand. However, Sillin didn't do so. She did it for the sake of slashing him with her blade. What puzzled the Roten was how the man in front of him knew where his real body was. Also, who was this man who cut off his arm and hand? The Roten knew all the high-level members of the Vanguard and the Navigator's first team, who were strong in individual combat. However, he really didn't know the man in front of him. The Roten didn't know or remember the man he passed by in the first-class prison a few years ago, who he thought was a prison guard. However, Sillin remembered that the reason why he was able to identify the real body of the Roten was that he remembered the smell of the Roten was different from those rat-like guys. If Shusag knew the reason, he might mourn for his poor sense of smell again. After cutting off the Roten's arm, Sillin stood still again as if he was waiting for the Roten to strike again. The Roten was much more vigilant after being cut off. He didn't act rashly again. He knew that Sillin was faster than him. In this case, he could wait for a better opportunity. There was more and more slime in the passage, and the air began to be filled with water vapor. The Roten lurked. He knew that as long as he didn't show up in his real body, Sillin couldn't kill him. So what if he knew the general location of the Roten's real body? While the Roten was waiting for an opportunity, Sillin said something strange. The Roten didn't understand it, but Shusag did. Because Sillin was speaking Miss Bodhisattva language, and it was a secret code often used by the military in the language. Huimao and Sillin were communicating in machine language, so even if it didn't understand the secret code, it could still understand what Sillin was trying to say. While the Roten was still confused, Sillin moved his hand, and a gun appeared in his hand. The moment the gun appeared, Shusag and Huimao both jumped and retreated. Bang! There was a soft muffled sound. After the bullet hit the place where the Roten was hiding, a layer of crystals quickly spread and covered the whole pool of slime. The crystals quickly thickened and tightly wrapped around the slime, sealing it. The water vapor in the air also quickly decreased. Ah! A shrill cry echoed in the passageway. The rats who had been running around in a frenzy seemed to have lost their sense of direction, and were bumping into each other everywhere. It was Sillin who had asked Cheto to increase the humidity in the passage. However, even if the Roten knew that the humidity was rising fast, he wouldn't have expected Sillin to do this. The humidity was good for the Roten too. He was just happy that the higher the humidity, the more agile he would be in his slime form. But now, this benefit turned into a fatal one. Shusag looked at the situation in front of him, and felt that half of his body was cold. In front of him, the place where the slime had accumulated was covered in a thick layer of ice. But it wasn't as cold as ice. It wasn't the formation of the ice that sent chills down Shusag's spine. Instead, it was the person lying at the front of the ice. Only his head and half of his torso remained, as if 2/3 of his body had been frozen solid. What's more, the remaining 2/3 of his body hadn't formed yet, and had been frozen inside the ice along with the slime. It looked very creepy. The Roten was frozen in the strange ice from the chest down and couldn't struggle at all. He didn't even have time to transform into his human form. Only his upper arms were exposed, and his forearms were still in the ice. That was how he ended up like this. The Roten stuck out his long, spiky tongue and tried to scrape off the ice that had frozen him. But before he could do anything, a gun was pressed against his forehead. Bang! The shrill scream was still echoing in the passage, but the rats who were bumping into each other had turned into puddles of water. The only things left in the passage were the water stains that were gradually being cleaned up by the starship's cleaning system. After a while, the place would be cleaned up as if nothing had happened. A shrill scream rang out from the training ground. That was the shrill and horrifying cry that the Latin let out when it was frozen. It was Sillin who had asked Cheto to play it here. Whether it was the navigator's men who were trying to break down the door outside, or the Vanguard's squad members who were tensed up inside the training ground, everyone stopped what they were doing at the same time when they heard the voice. Phoebe felt all the hair on her body standing on end when she heard the voice. Whose voice is that? A man next to Stanley swallowed and asked in a trembling voice. A person's voice contained a lot of things. It could reflect the emotions of the person when he was screaming, and it could also reflect part of the person's ability. When the voice wasn't disguised, the unique vibration in the sound waves was like a mark that reflected the person. Stanley's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Maybe the other members didn't know who the voice belonged to, but as the deputy commander of Vanguard, he clearly knew. Stanley just couldn't believe that the Roten would make such a hysterical scream. It sounded like the last cry before death. As a killer, the Roten even hid his traces, let alone deliberately making a sound. Moreover, the voice didn't sound fake. Translator, Atlas Studios editor. Atlas Studios because the navigator's men had stopped breaking down the door after hearing the shrill scream. The protective door of the training ground would not be broken down for the time being. The A-team members began to talk about who was secretly helping the navigator in order to ease the tension in their hearts. Only Phoebe was more silent than the rest. They knew that the reinforcements Mogaz was referring to weren't just the people outside the starship. He was referring to the robots lying in a secret place inside the starship. Without Little 11, Shikai, and Sillin, these robots wouldn't have made a move. Mogaz and the others didn't have the authority to order them around. They brought this upon themselves. After a brief pause, the breaking down of the door resumed. "Attention, everyone. Prepare for battle," Stanley said. The red-hot metal was particularly eye-catching in the darkness. It was also a signal that the door was about to be broken. The high-energy cutter cut through the training ground's reinforced walls one layer at a time. It was now the last layer. When a big mouth was gradually formed, everyone in the training ground raised their vigilance to the highest level and prepared themselves according to the formation arranged by Stanley. Clang. The door was kicked open, and 3 grenades were hurled inside. Block them. A large protective shield was activated, and several protective shields were connected to block the shockwave when the 3 grenades exploded. These 3 grenades would not be too powerful. If they blew up the entire training ground, it would give the Vanguard members a chance to escape. Therefore, the navigator's choice of grenades was well thought out. After the grenades exploded, the protective barriers were almost completely destroyed. Kill them. Maintain formation. Laser weapons would only expose themselves in an environment like this. That was why everyone chose to use metal bullets. However, there shouldn't be any light, but after the 2 sides fired, they found that the bullets created spots of light in the middle of the 2 sides. It was as if there was a transparent energy barrier in the middle. Click, click, click. The lights in the training ground came on. Gurgle. Something rolled out of nowhere to the middle of the 2 sides and stopped near the protective barrier. Under the sudden light, the rolling thing attracted the attention of both sides. It looked like an ice cube. In this ice cube, there was the bloodthirsty and violent eyes of the Roten, and his facial expression was distorted by the pain of being frozen in half. A voice rang out in the training ground. "What should I do to you guys for messing up my starship like this?" Chapter 391. The voice came from speakers in all directions of the training ground. From the moment the protective shield appeared, everyone knew that something had gone beyond their expectations. The training ground must have been equipped with a protective shield, but after the navigators people shut down the starship's system control, the Vanguard people trapped inside could not open the shield, and the distress signal could not be sent out. The people outside had no idea what was going on here. As long as the starship did not stop, the people outside could not easily enter the training ground. To activate the protective shield in the training ground, the control system must be connected. Plus, the lights inside the training ground were on, which meant that the control system was no longer blocked. What the navigator and Vanguard members were concerned about was, who was in control of the system? Stanley felt his scalp go numb as he looked at the ice next to the protective shield. It was not an illusion. It was really the Roten. He did not expect the Roten to be killed, and in such a way. It seemed that the Roten did not have a good time before he died. The head sealed in the ice, the expression on its face, and the voice he heard a few minutes ago. Stanley felt that he was breathing very carefully. Was it really Wuxia's people who were able to kill the Roten? But if it was Wuxia's people, why did they have to raise the protective shield to protect themselves and the others? Stanley knew the Roten, and so did several people on the A-team. Many people on the navigator's side also recognized the Roten's face. Because of this, the atmosphere suddenly became strange. The room was bright, but it felt even darker and more dangerous than before. What was lurking around here? Drip. A drop of blood fell on the floor and bloomed. Everyone raised their heads and looked up. The height of the training ground was about 30 meters, and on the wall at a place 20 meters above the ground, a person was standing steadily on a metal pole used for climbing training. When did this person appear? No one noticed it at all. It was completely silent. If it were not for the sound of liquid dripping in this strange silence, No one would have noticed the person standing there. This person was wearing armor, which Mogaz and the others were very familiar with. This was the armor unique to the members of the 11th team. However, the sound of liquid dripping did not come from this person. Instead, it came from the person in his hand who was no longer breathing. Tires. Stanley recognized the man whose chest had been pierced, and whose blood was dripping from the wound. Tires was also a member of the Fog. He was known as Swiftblade Tires. His blade was shaped like a tear, and it was extremely fast. Many of his victims didn't even have time to react before they lost their senses. Like the Rodin, Tires had caused a lot of trouble for the A-team not long ago and caused them heavy losses. But now, this killer with the swift knife Tires was being held in his hand like garbage. His face was deformed, his chest caved in, and many bones were broken. First, it was Rodin's head, then Swiftblade Tires. The two Fog killers were slaughtered one after another. Even the navigators, who thought they were well prepared, felt that things had gone beyond their expectations. In contrast to Stanley and Navigator's worry and anxiety, Mogaz and the others were much more relaxed. At the very least, the people who came were on his side, and not Wuxia or other enemies. Captain, Mogaz jumped for joy. It really is you guys. Phoebe and the others were also overjoyed, but they didn't jump to their feet like Mogaz. Mogaz was so excited that he felt like he was the one who had killed 2 MIS members in a row. He was so happy that he couldn't care less about Stanley's glare and giggled to himself. Stanley's eyebrows twitched. He ignored Mogaz and turned his attention to the man perched on the metal pole. Sillin? Stanley asked. The voice that came from the speaker just now belonged to Sillin. However, Stanley's mood was completely different now. Why did Sillin appear at this time? How did he get in? The man perched on the metal pole didn't say anything. He loosened his grip and tossed Tires to the ground. Tires, who was in free fall, smashed into the hard floor of the training ground with a bang. Everyone in the training ground tensed up with this sound, and their hearts trembled. Someone on Navigator's side quickly pulled out a gun and fired at them the moment he let go of Tires. Over there was no protective barrier. The barrier only surrounded the center of the training ground in a cylindrical shape. The man perched on the metal pole was outside the barrier. The shooting was almost silent. In addition, the person who fired the shot was a veteran. He grasped the timing and had sufficient accuracy. However, when the bullet hit the person on the metal pole, it made a clanging sound, and then the bullet bounced off. The man on the metal pole was completely unharmed. Bulletproof armor. That was what everyone thought. As soon as they realized the bulletproof armor's function, the leader of Navigator's team felt a chill run down his spine. It was an instinct he had honed through life and death situations. Just as he reacted and opened his mouth to shout the word little, before the word heart left his mouth, a figure passed through their ranks. The shooter was pierced by 5 specialized scythe-like finger bones. Shusag quickly fled after the hit. The Navigator's team reacted quickly and fired at him. However, Shusag's evasion speed and the armor's defensive function didn't really hurt him. Shusag kept the sole of his armor glued to the wall and ran perpendicular to it. Some of the Navigator's team kept firing at Shusag, some kept an eye on the man perched on the metal pole, and the rest stayed on alert. Behind the protective shield, the A-team members felt that it was ridiculous when they saw this. They were the ones who had been ordered to protect Shusag, but now they had to stand inside the barrier and watch everything like bystanders. Shusag's pursuers couldn't hurt him even if they managed to hit him. Some of them even switched to laser weapons, but they couldn't do anything to him. The armored Shusag was nimbly dodging around the battlefield. Wait! The leader of Navigator's team gestured. He sensed something was wrong. The man perched on the metal pole hadn't moved since he dropped Tires, and the man who killed his own team member was dodging. Did he not have any backup plan? Soon enough, the leader of the group made up his mind. Retreat. He gestured for everyone to retreat at full speed. But it was too late. A hail of bullets rained down on the Navigator's team before they could even get close to the broken door. The Navigator's team was also wearing armor that could block bullets to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. The The visors on their armor allowed them to see the invisible thing at the door. They didn't know what it was. All they could see was a vague outline of a human. "Watch out, invisible people!" one of the navigator's team members shouted. Invisible people? Stanley was perplexed. He recalled that there was indeed a member of the 11th squad who possessed the invisibility ability, but that member was only a little girl. Furthermore, there weren't just one invisibility ability in front of him. There were many of them, and they didn't look like little girls either. Stanley glanced at Mogaz and the others thoughtfully. The excitement in Mogaz's eyes told him that they knew the reason behind this. "What's that, Phoebe?" Stanley asked. He didn't ask Mogaz. That guy wasn't reliable. Phoebe paused for a moment before answering. "Reinforcements." "What kind of answer is that?" Stanley wasn't satisfied with this answer. "Didn't I tell you? If Little 11 wasn't sealed off, these reinforcements would have been able to help us a long time ago," Mogaz said. "The captain kept them here so that Little 11 could be released if he was in danger, but..." Mogaz shrugged and didn't say anything else. The A squad was the one who forced Little 11 to surrender his authority and gave the navigator's team a chance to seal off the ship's defenses. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in such a sorry state right now, and they wouldn't have lost so many people. Before Sillin left, he told Stanley not to go overboard and give the starship some freedom. But Stanley didn't listen to him at all. Was he to blame for Sillin? Was he to blame for not making himself clear? It wasn't strange. Every team had their own developments and secrets. This wasn't the military. This was the rule of the Hunter Corps. Taking control of the starship and kicking out the crew was already a little out of line. They only had themselves to blame for this. Stanley tried to recall what Sillin said during the handover, but he couldn't remember it. He was so focused on getting the 11th squad out of here that he didn't pay attention to Sillin's words at all. He couldn't remember it now. I think Sillin said something else. Stanley was in a dilemma. On the other side of the shield, the navigator's men were being suppressed. Not only did they have to fight with the invisible people, but they also had to pay attention to their close-range attacks. The invisible people moved very fast like well-trained soldiers. Their attacks were fatal, but they didn't have a murderous aura. Quite a few of their members had already been killed. "Seal off the control system again," the leader ordered. "No, we can't seal it off," a man holding an elliptical device shouted. He didn't know what was going on. The device clearly said that the starship system had been sealed off, but someone was clearly still controlling it. Screech, the leader of the navigators, slashed an invisible man in half. As soon as they clashed, they realized that these invisible men were not afraid of bullets. The threat of bullets to these invisible men was limited. Therefore, when it came to close combat, they would just use lightsabers or other cold weapons. The invisible man that was split in half revealed his physical body, but what shocked everyone was that what was revealed from the cross-section of the severed body was not the flesh of a human, but machinery. They're robots. Fuck, why are there robots here? Why were there so many robots here? Also, why were their movements and combat techniques so similar to humans? Were they from the Robert family? Everyone thought of the Robert family immediately. Mogaz grew even more smug when he saw everyone's reaction. Phoebe curled her lips in annoyance. But to be honest, this did give her a sense of pride. The Robert family wasn't the only ones with robots like this. Wuxia wasn't the only ones who could fight against the mist, and the A squad wasn't the only ones who could do great things. The 11th squad can do it all the same. The robots were enough of a headache for the navigators, but what happened next was even more frustrating. The gravitational field was suddenly deactivated. Without the sudden loss of gravity, the navigators didn't even have time to react before 7 of them were killed by the flying robots. It looked like a one-sided massacre. The navigators tried to break out of the encirclement, but when they finally did, they were smashed into the wall and flattened to a pulp. A giant door god stood guard at the entrance. Shueqio's body swelled several times in size after his transformation. His fleshy hands were as hard as steel, and his reflexes were quick and agile. He killed a person with a single slap. Even if he didn't die, he wasn't far from it. Snowball was responsible for taking care of these people who broke out of the encirclement. However, Sillin also told him that if the other party used grenades or other artillery weapons, he could just dodge and let these people escape. There were robots in charge of cleaning up other parts of the starship anyway. Shueisha was responsible for taking care of the escapees while Mogaz was yelling at the other side of the barrier. Come on, Shueisha. Kill that bastard. There's one on the left. Watch out for grenades. Behind. Two of them have escaped. Veins popped out on Stanley's forehead. He wanted nothing more than to tape Mogaz's mouth shut. Just as Stanley was about to lose his temper, Mogaz suddenly stopped and muttered, "That's weird. Why isn't Mr. Cat here?" Phoebe and the others were curious as well. Given the cat's personality, it wouldn't miss out on a chance to vent its anger and show off. If Sillin was here, then Mr. Cat must be here as well. But what was the cat doing? Who's Mr. Cat? A member of the A squad couldn't hold it in any longer. Every single person in the 11th squad, or even inhuman, was shocking to them. Why would someone who had the ability to kill the assassins of the fog stay in a small team that had just been formed? If it were them, they would have joined the A squad a long time ago. Their strength was more than enough to secure a spot in the A squad. Also, if the 11th squad was this strong, why didn't the A squad give them any information about what was going on? Mr. Cat is Mr. Cat, our captain's pet, Mogaz answered. Isn't it that fat gray cat over there? Another A squad member gestured with his hands and asked. Yes, that's it. Mr. Cat is the strongest in our squad after the captain, and Cheto too. They're the strongest in the 11th squad. And who's Cheto? Someone asked. Mogaz was about to answer when Phoebe lashed him with her whip. What the hell are you talking about at a time like this? Mogaz finally shut his mouth and turned his attention to the battlefield. There weren't many navigators left on the battlefield. 7 or 8 of them had broken out of the encirclement, and the rest had either been killed by the robots or killed by Shueisha. The leader of the navigators team was still here. He and a few other team members held back the androids and killed a few androids. It had to be said that the strength of this leader was really good. It was at this moment Stanley noticed that the man standing on the metal pole had finally moved. Since there was no gravity, he used the thrusters on his armor to fly toward the leader. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of the leader. Bang! The leader only had enough time to block the punch with his sword, but he was knocked back by the force of the blow. He might have been sent flying if his armor wasn't holding him in place. A fist-shaped dent had appeared on the sword that blocked the punch. It couldn't withstand a second attack. The remaining 3 navigators wanted to help, but before they could turn around, one of them felt a chill in his chest. He had been pierced. Shusag flung the dead navigator aside, and went on to finish off the remaining 2. Crack. Crack. Bang. The leader of the navigators was pinned against the wall by Cheto's neck. Both of his arms were broken, and several of his ribs were broken. Crack. The sound of bones breaking entered the battlefield again. The leader's neck had been broken. The moment the leader breathed his last, the person who was strangling him quickly retreated. Boom, the place had exploded. In fact, the leader wanted to detonate another bomb, which was placed near the energy cabin. As long as the leader gave the order or his own heartbeat stopped, the bomb would be detonated and the entire starship would be blown up. However, when he was grabbed by the neck and knew that he would not be able to live for long, he gave the order to detonate the bomb, but he did not find any movement. He didn't have time to react. The hands around his neck were already pressing down on him. A heartbeat stop was the only way to detonate the small bomb. Even so, the explosion shook the entire training ground like crazy. If it weren't for the protective barrier around the training ground, Mogaz and the others would have been caught in it already. Shusag and Shueisha had flown away and found cover before the explosion happened, so they weren't hurt at all. Hey Captain, are you alright? Mogaz shouted at the messy training ground. Everyone turned to look at him as well. Not even armor could protect them from a bomb of this magnitude at such a close distance. The gravity system had been reactivated, and the smoke and dust from the explosion was slowly dissipating. A man walked out of the smoke and dust and grew clearer and clearer as Mogaz shouted. As the figure walked out, Everyone saw the electric light flashing on the figure's body. Mogaza's mouth fell open. Cheto. Where was Sillin? If this man was Cheto, then where was Sillin? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.